Chapter 675 Kuelong Ocean, Xinmo Island. As usual, the Sea King was wearing a long robe and inspecting the construction of the island. The Sea King was very satisfied with the development of the island. Relying on the knowledge stored in the Shadow King's inheritance, the Mute army's strength grew steadily. What the Sea King needed now was a stable development. He believed that if this continued, the Mute army would soon become the leader of the top 10 war chambers of commerce and embark on the path to the center of the Netherworld Ocean. Finally, he would find a way to replace the Netherworld Chamber of Commerce. The Sea King nodded in satisfaction as he looked at the craftsmen who were building new high-end warships by the sea. However, just as he was about to leave for the next location, his expression froze and he looked up at the horizon. In the distance, a giant golden bird swooped down from a high altitude. Its target was Xinmo Island. The Sea King was familiar with this giant bird and knew that a mission from the Netherworld Chamber of Commerce had arrived. The Sea King was not surprised. After all, it was under the name of the War Chamber of Commerce. It was normal for a mission to arrive. At this moment, the giant bird arrived above his head and dropped a letter before flapping its wings and flying away. The Sea King waved at the letter on the ground, and the letter flew into his hand. With a calm mind, he opened the letter and started reading the content. However, after a cursory glance, the Sea King's expression suddenly turned extremely ugly. Gathering the top 10 war chambers of commerce to annihilate the player clan? Is this for real? The Sea King was dumbfounded. It was a crucial period for him to develop his forces, and what he wanted the most was peace. However, he was told that he was going to war with the player clan now. What the F***CK? Looking at the content of the letter, the Sea King cursed in his heart. His good mood was completely ruined. In fact, he knew that this moment would come sooner or later. After all, the player clan was too arrogant. They were practically jumping around in front of the Netherworld Chamber of Commerce with arrogant provocation. It was already incredible that the Netherworld Chamber of Commerce could tolerate them until now. However, the Sea King was still extremely distressed when faced with such a situation. Going to war with the player clan. If it was 2 years ago, he would definitely be in favor of it. They should F***king kill these bastards who are not afraid of death and send them to the 6 realms of reincarnation. However, the Sea King felt that if they really fought, he might be the first to be sent to the 6 realms of reincarnation. He wasn't sure if the player clan could fight against the powerful underworld merchant guild, but as the vanguard of the player clan and the player clan, they would definitely meet a tragic end. They were basically no different from cannon fodder. The Netherworld Trade Association might not understand the player clan, but how could he not? That group of lunatics loved it when their enemies hated them to the core, yet they could not do anything to them. The Sea King knew this very well. Fighting with them was a double blow on the physical and mental level. However, he could not disobey the orders of the Netherworld Chamber of Commerce. At this moment, he knew that he had to make a choice. He could no longer benefit from both sides. He had to choose a side. Looking at the letter in his hand, the Sea King turned his head to look at the blue ocean in melancholy. He sighed in his heart. Didn't you say that you would let me develop slowly? Didn't you say that my future would be bright? F***king Underworld Merchant Guild. F***king Player Clan. I'm very annoyed right now. You're the only ones who have so much to do. On the player's side, the ambushing of the demonic ape tribe had reached the point where the demonic ape tribe was furious. Due to the existence of the bloodline curse, the demonic ape tribe could not resist the temptation of the player clan's corpses. Even if they knew that it was a trap, they still chased after them with bloodshot eyes. However, what welcomed them was the soul-devouring beast trap set by the players. At the same time, the soul-devouring beasts had also discovered this characteristic of the player clan. These soul-devouring beasts had gradually learned to cooperate with the player clan in concealment. Then, they would wait for the player clan to lure the demonic ape tribe over before they made their move. This was a pleasant surprise to the players. Therefore, the players began to work together with the soul-devouring beasts to gain mutual benefits. They worked together and conspired to trick the demonic ape tribe into their trap. Such a large-scale operation naturally attracted the attention of the demonic ape tribe. However, they were helpless against the soul-devouring beasts in the West. They could only convey the news to the honorable demonic ape. After the honorable demonic ape received the news, he immediately began to investigate the player clan. Starting from the path that the players took, he quickly found out that the player clan had crossed the barrier of the first precinct. The honorable demonic ape was very familiar with the first precinct because it used to be his territory. He had lived there for a long time, and many species were created by him. However, he had never seen these new species, the player clan. He also did not think that these creatures were naturally evolved from the creatures he created in the first precinct, because he was extremely familiar with the species he created. He knew how they evolved like the back of his hand and would never mistake them. Thus, he began to investigate further and discovered the root of the problem. These creatures had actually come to the first precinct through the space tunnel. The direction of the space tunnel's fluctuation was in Bakey. After investigating this, the honorable demonic ape's line of sight penetrated through the layers of space and arrived at Bakey. He immediately discovered the huge group of creatures that lived there, the player clan. This clan was the force that was causing trouble in the second precinct of the Hell Path. After thoroughly investigating the reason, the honorable demonic ape revealed a cruel smile. Since they dared to offend me, then there's no need for this clan to exist anymore. They shall become the children's food. The lives of the players went on, as usual. However, something unexpected happened on this day. The Sea King's subordinate, Hei Sui, came to the Lioli coast and informed them of something. The 10 great war chambers of commerce of the devouring sea were gathering and getting ready for battle. At the same time, Hei Sui informed the players that the Sea King wanted them to evacuate as soon as possible and hide in other regions. They would only return after the storm had passed. Although the players did not reply to Hei Sui, they were filled with disdain. A bunch of experience and soul coins are on their way. Why should we run? It was a surprise that the Underworld Chamber of Commerce wanted to attack them. Although they were definitely no match for them, it was never a problem for the players to defeat the Underworld Chamber of Commerce. The key was whether they could kill their opponents and obtain soul coins and experience. Therefore, it was impossible to run. They had to fight to the end. However, the players were still very concerned about this matter, and they immediately made preparations. As the posts about the Underworld Chamber of Commerce's impending attack appeared in the forum, the players who were searching for treasures in the outer sea, earning money in the Instance Dungeon, and exploring other regions all rushed to the Mansion of the Dead. The players quickly made preparations for this battle. The health recovery potions, enhancement potions, and the self-made attack items from the auction house were quickly swept away. The atmosphere of war gradually intensified. When it came to war, the players were no longer the newbies who were scared silly by the grand scenes when they first entered the war. Most of the players were now battle-hardened. They only had a thirst for war because it could bring them great benefits. In order to maximize the benefits of war, Lu Wu even created the war honor system. The emergence of this war system made the players' benefits in war more standardized and not as messy as before. For example, during a war, there were 5,000 people in a group. However, the distribution of benefits during the war was very troublesome and could even lead to disputes. For example, the warrior players who were at the forefront would be trapped in the most intense area of the war. They would most likely be the first batch of players to die. Their early deaths would mean that the subsequent soul coins and experience would disappear. In comparison, the mage players would hide behind and attack, while harvesting the enemy's lives. Not only was the level of danger much lower, but they would also be the party who would benefit the most. This caused the warrior players to feel very dissatisfied during the war. They felt that they had put in a lot of effort, but in the end, they would gain the least. It was a thankless and unfair task. However, the war honor system was a good solution to this distribution problem. The war honor system that Lu Wu created divided the benefits into 2 categories: the total amount of soul coins obtained after the war and the total amount of experience obtained by the entire group after the war. These were also the 2 main categories of benefits for the players in war. The function of the war honor system was to collect and store all the players' benefits and not distribute them for the time being. After a war, the players would exchange their contributions for rewards from the team interest pool, including soul coins and EXP. The specific war contributions were divided into 6 categories by Lu Wu. Current war campaign, personal output, damage received, auxiliary healing, number of enemies killed, number of bosses killed, special category. Each category corresponded to a type of player. This way, the distribution problem would be solved easily. Even if a player fought with his life and was accidentally killed, his benefits would not stop. This was because the members of the group would continue to fight and expand the benefits in the pool of benefits. When the time came, the player who died would be able to exchange his contribution for soul coins and experience points in the pool of benefits as long as he went online. In this way, it would not matter even if the warrior player died in battle. As long as he achieved a fixed amount of contribution points, he could exchange his contribution for rewards. Apart from these 6 categories, there was also a death bonus to evaluate the player's contributions. This was to see if the value of a player's death was great, and then the points would be given. Lu Wu let the artifact examine all of this, and the artifact would then give out the points based on the contribution points. In other words, as long as the players in a group activated the war honor system during the war, the benefits, soul coins, experience points obtained from killing enemies in the group would be stored in the pool of benefits. The contributions of the players during the war would be converted into honor points. At the end of the war, the points of the whole group would be combined to obtain a percentage of individual benefits. Then, the corresponding rewards would be drawn from the pool of benefits. Under such circumstances, the more effort one put in, the higher the contribution points one would get, and the greater the benefits one would obtain at the end of the war. Moreover, the war honor system that Lu Wu had set up was bound to the artifact. Under its detection, the calculation of the contribution points would not be a problem. The benefits of a group would be very fair, which would increase the enthusiasm of the players. At the same time, the extra benefits obtained during the war would not be included in the overall pool of benefits. For example, when a player accidentally picked up precious spiritual materials or high-quality weapons during the war, these war items obtained by luck would be classified as items of personal benefits and would not be included in the overall pool of benefits. This would also bring about many changes and surprises in the war. However, the existence of the war honor system would allow the players who put in the effort to reap their rewards. The players who were most happy with the appearance of this system were the warriors and assassins. As the party who put in more effort than they gained, they often felt that the mage players who stayed at the rear to deal damage were simply the sons of the battle officials. They reaped many benefits and did not die easily. However, with the appearance of the war honor system, they knew that their efforts in the future would be rewarded. Of course, all of this was free. The activation of the war honor system would be prompted when the group had more than 5,000 members. Then, the players would vote to decide. This was the freedom that Lu Wu had given them. Chapter 676. Are all of you aware of the mission this time? I'm afraid I'll have to watch the entire battle. How awesome! On the other hand, the European server players once again keenly sensed that the original server was up to something. Their thoughts were simple. The original server wanted to monopolize everything. Oh, no way. Children, go ahead and devour. Those creatures that you hate will become your food. He could not tell if Eldering was bluffing him or if he really knew the truth. However, he dare not take the risk at this moment. Eldering listened and nodded silently. His gaze swept across the crowd and stopped at the Sea King. After the 9 major chambers of commerce finished distributing the tasks, Eldering turned to look at the Sea King. Eldering naturally did not know what the Sea King was thinking. He smiled and nodded, then said, "Don't think too much. It's enough that you understand what I mean. Perform well, and no one will know your secret. Your collusion with the player clan will also disappear with the destruction of the player clan. Develop well in the underworld chamber of commerce in the future. I have high hopes for you." Looking at the grave expression on the Sea King's face, Eldering patted him on the shoulder and immediately disappeared from where he stood. As for whether the player clan would escape to the Sea King was not worried at all. Following the announcement of the Underworld Chamber of Commerce's gathering order, battleships arrived one after another in the Kuelong Ocean. Then, he walked toward the island while cursing in his heart. The distribution of tasks during the battle was not a trivial matter for the War Chambers of Commerce. "Old man, you bastard. You are the one who suggested to wipe out the player clan? You old fart, don't mess with the player clan even if you have nothing better to do. How dare you drag me into this? I curse you for giving birth to a son without an asshole. The distribution of tasks is complete. Go ahead and inform everyone to gather here in 4 hours and depart for Bakey." Eldering said. He had to admit that the Sea King's growth had completely exceeded his expectations. Therefore, he had high hopes for the Sea King. "Eldering, don't misunderstand. I only have hatred for the player clan. How could I collude with them?" However, the Sea King was unaware of all this. When he saw Elder Ing looking at him, he immediately nodded to show his respect. "Such a good task. Old man, you are too biased. But I like it." Hence, he decisively began to gather his men. After Elder Ing came closer, the people in charge of the various war chambers of commerce immediately opened their mouths to speak respectfully. "Sea King, you've just joined the war chamber of commerce, so your strength is relatively weak. You'll be responsible for the blockade at the back of the sea. Don't let the player clan escape from the void ocean." The idea of overthrowing the Underworld Merchant Guild and replacing it was born from his conversation with this old man. However, when they thought about how the Sea King could watch from the back while they had to fight head-on with the War Chamber of Commerce, they were extremely dissatisfied and could only glare angrily at the Sea King. Upon hearing this, the Sea King, who was initially very nervous, was confused. At that moment, he was seriously suspecting that this old man was secretly plotting something. He had already noticed that there seemed to be a problem with this Eldering, responsible for sealing off the sea, so there was no need to fight. After Eldering left, the Sea King was dumbfounded. After all, they had nothing to do with each other before. There must be a conspiracy behind the sudden care. The venerable demonic ape's voice resounded throughout the Purgatory Realm's second realm. "Sea King, do you know why I gave you this mission?" The Sea King's heart trembled. "Could it be that I'm too weak?" Underworld, Kuelong Ocean. The Sea King turned a blind eye to the gazes around him. With a solemn expression, he looked as if he was about to shoulder a heavy responsibility. This made the people in charge of the War Chamber of Commerce gnash their teeth. Eldering nodded and continued to speak. Now, the Sea King had become his biggest expectation. Everyone immediately responded and then dispersed. "Doesn't this mean that I can just watch this bunch of idiots charge and fight the player clan to the death?" In fact, he was cursing in his heart. At the same time, Elder Ing, who was the core figure of this battle, also arrived at Exinamo Island. At that moment, Elder Ing suddenly called out to the Sea King. The Sea King immediately stopped and turned to look at Elder Ing with a puzzled expression. "Don't bother explaining. I just want you to understand that in such a situation, you have to make a choice. If you can't steel your heart to make a decision, then you will be dragged into an irrecoverable situation. You're a smart person. You should know that this is the time to give up certain interests and relationships." Elder Ing did not speak until the people in charge of the War Chamber of Commerce had left. At the same time, in the second precinct of the Naraka realm, a space teleportation formation was slowly forming. "Understood. I promise to complete the mission." The Sea King immediately replied with a solemn expression, but in fact, he was grinning from ear to ear. Then, countless demonic apes gathered in the direction of the teleportation formation from all directions. Since he had inherited the Shadow King's inheritance, it meant that he had accepted the mission of overthrowing the Underworld Chamber of Commerce. The Sea King would definitely embark on this path of slaughter in the future. After receiving the notice, the War Chamber of Commerce decisively set off to the Kuelong Ocean and gathered near Exinamo Island according to the instructions. The player clan ran away? That was the biggest joke in the world. They would not stop until the entire clan was annihilated. Hence, running away did not exist for the player clan at all. "Understood." Everyone immediately responded. After stepping on the coast, Eldering looked up and saw the Sea King and the other people in charge of the War Chamber of Commerce standing nearby, waiting for him. Back then, he had come up with many plans to help the Sea King obtain the Shadow King's inheritance. However, he did not expect that there would be so many accidents along the way. The Sea King did not even need his help to brew the soul, praying fluid, and easily obtain the Shadow King's inheritance. Eldering had a whole new level of respect for the Sea King. Upon hearing this, the Sea King felt that the old man must have some ulterior motives for being so nice to him. Next, let me assign the task for each of you in this operation to wipe out the player clan. Does Eldering mean that I should abandon the player clan? But why did he give me such a chance instead of destroying my Mu-Te empire directly? If they were assigned to fight head-on, they would have to bear the greatest losses. Naturally, they hoped that their forces would be assigned to the easiest place. Upon hearing the assignment, the other people in charge of the War Chamber of Commerce glared at the Sea King furiously. The Sea King did not answer, but his heart was filled with doubts. Since Eldering controlled the quota of the War Chamber of Commerce, he could replace them anytime he was dissatisfied with them. Hence, they could only agree to the assignment. Upon hearing this, everyone's heart tightened. First, the Bloodstained Fleet, the Black Sea Fleet, the Sword Crown Fleet, and the Purple Bend Fleet. You will be in charge of attacking Baki from the front. The Smoke Dragon Fleet will be in charge of blocking the left side of the sea and attacking from the land. The Dragonhorn Chamber of Commerce will be in charge of blocking the right side of the sea and attacking from the land. Bulsh **T. It's because I know that you are in cahoots with the player clan. If any member of the player clan escapes, you will be severely punished. Do you understand, Sea King? Eldering said in a deep voice with a straight face. Upon hearing this, the Sea King's face turned pale. For hours later, the War Chamber of Commerce of the Devouring Sea Division had assembled outside of Xinmo Island. Then, under Elder Ying's command, they set off for Baki in a grandiose manner. Thinking of this, the Sea King looked at himself. His expression gradually became strange, and he could not help but shiver. As soon as he finished speaking, a portal suddenly appeared above the formation. Regarding Elder Ying's assignment, they dared not voice their anger. Eldering. Chapter 677. Ever since the Battle Royale where Jin Yao was killed, the European server players gradually realized one thing. The original players always seemed to encounter good opportunities and use them to quickly improve the combat power of their own players. At that time, some players had raised this issue on the European server forum and expressed their opinions. However, not many players cared about what he said at that time. However, after the battle for supremacy in the Kowloon Ocean and the subsequent war in the Sunluo domain, the European server players had generally accepted this matter. It was impossible for the European server players not to be jealous of this. However, they did not think too much about it. They just attributed this opportunity to Baki's unique geographical location, which could easily produce such opportunities for development. It was not a special arrangement by the officials. The reason for this was simple. Just like the original players, the European server players knew that the officials would not interfere with the development of the game world. The arrival of opportunities was also related to the development of the self-operating world. It was not a special arrangement by the officials. In fact, Lu Wu did not interfere in any of Baki's battles with the outside world. The battles with Chan Na, the Sea King, the Nine Luminaries, and other local forces were all situations that the players encountered in their own development. Lu Wu did not expect to form a relationship with the Sea King, a great enemy. Moreover, the European server players felt that compared to Naraka, their growth environment was already very comfortable. Although it was not as good as the original server, it was more than enough. However, the European server players also began to think of countermeasures for the rapid development of the original server. They tried to catch up with the development progress of the original server as soon as possible. Hence, they came up with a set of methods to freeload the original server's experience and soul coins. That was to always pay attention to the original server situation. If they sensed that there was something to be gained, they would freeload it and not let the original server monopolize it. This really gave the European server players a taste of sweetness. After a few rounds of battles, they earned a lot of money. The entire server's combat power was greatly improved as a result, and they also obtained a large number of spiritual materials and other resources. This time, the European server players who were lurking in the original server forum to inquire about the news immediately sent the news back to the European server forum when they found out that the original players had begun to gather for war. Hence, a large number of European server lurkers came and began to investigate the specific information. Soon, they understood the whole story. It turned out that the Underworld Chamber of Commerce's army was about to attack Baki. In this regard, they made a decisive decision and immediately began to prepare for war, sending out recruitment posters. Soon, a large number of European server players responded to the call. Most of the European server players did not want to miss out on such a lucrative war. Soon, the European server's army assembled and advanced toward Baki. On the other side, the fleet of the 10 major war chambers of commerce had sailed into the void ocean. With regards to this battle, Eldering had already made up his mind to completely wipe out the player clan after understanding that he could not change anything. Initially, he wanted the player clan to assist the Sea King in his growth. However, at this moment, he would only be putting himself in danger if he tried to exonerate the player clan. This was the choice he had made with the Sea King. At this time, the only thing he could do was to destroy the player clan with lightning speed and prove that he had nothing to do with them. As the fleet gradually steered towards the Lioli coast, the corners of Elder Ying's mouth curled up into a cruel smile. As long as the Sea King was still around, the plan to revive the Shadow Clan could continue. The existence of the player clan was just a decoration. After another period of sailing, when their warship stepped into the waters of the Lioli coast, Eldering raised his head to look in the direction of the coast, and then opened his mouth to say in a deep voice, "Begin." As soon as Elder Ying's voice fell, the people in charge of the war chambers of commerce on the 10 leading warships each took out a scroll and began chanting. 10 Neptune's pardon were activated at the same time. Instantly, huge waves rose in front of the fleet. Countless water elemental giants gathered and moved towards the coast. At this time, the players were already prepared. When they saw the arrival of the war chambers of commerce, they immediately responded. Countless magic turrets were constructed and began to fire spells. In an instant, the sky was covered by spells of various colors. Spell trajectories were drawn out as they fell towards the direction of the fleet. The surface of the sea was instantly filled with explosions near the Acheron Merchant Guild's fleet. Seeing this, the leader of the bloodstained fleet immediately took a step forward and raised the Neptune's pardon in his hand. With a soft shout, the seawater in front of the fleet gathered and formed a water barrier to block the player's attack. However, he was naturally unable to withstand the attack of countless spells from the players alone. Just before the water barrier shattered, another person raised the Neptune's pardon in his hand and formed a new water barrier behind him. After that, layers of barriers were formed, preventing the player's attacks from breaking through the defense for a while. Seeing that, Elder Ying's face broke into a smile. He felt that he had overestimated the combat power of the player clan. Although there were many spells coming at them, he could tell at a glance that these spells were not worth mentioning at all in terms of strength. However, at this time, the surface of the sea suddenly shook, followed by countless explosions. "There's an ambush underwater," the leader of the bloodstained fleet immediately said. Hearing this, the leaders of the various fleets hurriedly went to the side of the ship and looked down. They instantly noticed that countless blue water balls had appeared in the water. These water balls exploded the moment they came into contact with the warships, creating countless electric arcs on the barrier of the warships. Fortunately, the power of these electric arcs was not enough to destroy the warship's defensive layer. It was only the constant explosions that shook the warships. "Speed up," Eldering said calmly. Hearing this, the leaders of the various war chambers of commerce immediately gave the order, and the fleet of warships accelerated. The players on the coast saw the Acheron Merchant Guild's warships advancing smoothly through the minefield and could not help but curse in the live chat channel. "Bomberman, come out and explain. Your bombs are selling for such a high price. Where's their power?" Fake bombs. Not reliable at all. Refund. Refund. I thought we could blow them up in one go, but this is the result. How infuriating. Brothers, I only said that the minefield can weaken the defensive layer on the surface of their warships and help you break through their defensive layer. I never said that it can explode. Stop cursing, I'll refund you, but only half. I won't refund the materials. It was clear that the power of this batch of minefield was barely satisfactory. It could not even break through the warship's defensive layer, much to the disappointment of many players. Niefeng was also helpless about this. He felt that the players' expectations of him were too high. Although he did have the ability to create powerful bombs, the prerequisite was that he had enough materials to support it. Without any capital, he could only create some minefield that was less powerful. However, seeing the players' dissatisfaction, Niefeng trembled in fear. He knew that he had exaggerated when he described this new bomb in the forum, so he quickly compromised and chose to return it. As the Acheron Merchant Guild approached the coast, the players' expressions gradually turned grim. Yin Xiaoqi's voice rang in the live chat channel. Everyone retreat. Don't fight them at sea. As long as their warships cannot reach the coast, their greatest advantage will be gone. Hearing this, the players decisively began to retreat. Just as Yin Xiaoqi said, the advantage of warships could only be used at sea. Even if these high-end warships were terrifyingly strong, they would not be a threat if they could not reach the coast. As the players retreated, the coast of Lioli Merchant Guild was soon empty. However, something unexpected happened. As the Acheron Merchant Guild's warships neared the coast, some of them actually entered Lioli Beach and headed in the direction of the players' retreat. At the same time, many figures leaped out from the warships that could not reach the coast. The ones leading the charge were the blood-stained Merchant Guild's merfolk warriors. These Merchant Guild members were very familiar with killing. Their expressions were ferocious as they prepared for a massacre. However, when the merfolk stepped into the forest beside the beach, the first row of members suddenly collapsed. It's an ambush! The Merchant Guild's high-ranking warrior roared. However, just as he finished speaking, the trees beside him suddenly shook. Then, a translucent figure appeared in front of him, and a sharp dagger pierced into his neck. Cough, cough, cough. Phantom Fish. Clan. The Bloodstained Merchant Guild's high-ranking warrior spat out a mouthful of blood. We've come to the wrong place. Illusory Killer pulled out his dagger. His body turned transparent again as he headed for his next target. At this moment, the Phantom Fish clan members lying in ambush in the forest began their assassination. Every time the Phantom Fish clan members appeared, an enemy would fall into a pool of blood. After gaining immortality, the Phantom Fish clan members became as wild as the players. Although they were assassins, it did not matter if they were discovered. They were not afraid of death anyway. Anyone who sees them must die. Under the Phantom Fish clan's powerful assassination skills, the Bloodstained Merchant Guild's frontline members were killed in a short period of time. Why is the Phantom Fish clan here? Why are they helping the player clan? Are they tired of living? Seeing this scene, Shiuran, who was commanding from the rear, lost his voice. Brother, the Phantom Fish clan has already sided with the player clan. Didn't anyone tell you? The Sea King leisurely patted President Shiuran's shoulder and said. Then he snapped his fingers. Immediately, the Mute warships left the coast and headed for the sealed sea behind them. Hearing this, President Shiuran's face turned pale. He knew very well how powerful the Phantom Fish clan was. They were the undisputed #1 bounty hunter group in the Devouring Sea. They were definitely not weaker than the Bloodstained Merchant Guild. Therefore, when he heard the news of the Phantom Fish clan siding with the player clan, he realized that something was amiss. When he first came into contact with the player clan's combat power did not seem to be a threat to him. Therefore, the Phantom Fish clan's siding with the player clan was very strange. Seeing his clansmen being massacred in the forest, President Shiuran could not stand it any longer. Without thinking about it, he immediately levitated into the air and headed for the forest beside the Lioli coast. At this moment, the players' counterattack had begun. Countless players suddenly took out their tool hammers, turned around, and dashed toward the warships that were chasing after them. Clink, clank, 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 clank. According to Yin Xiaoqi, since these warships could come ashore, they would completely dismantle them. It was impossible to defeat them. Therefore, it was necessary to maximize the profits. If they could obtain spare parts, it would be a profit. Chapter 678. Seeing this scene, many of the War Chamber of Commerce's members descended from the warships and charged at the surrounding players. At this time, many warrior players immediately went up and began a fight with them. In terms of average combat power, the players were indeed lacking compared to the war merchants, but there were also exceptions. At this moment, many of the expert players erupted with powerful battle prowess. 1 against 2, 1 against 3, or even more. Their powerful physiques allowed them to display their abilities to their heart's content in battle. However, with the arrival of a large number of War Chamber of Commerce members, the number of players dying in the battle increased. The Bloodstained Chamber of Commerce on the right was restricted by the Illusion Fish tribe and couldn't come over to support them. However, the other War Chambers of Commerce kept coming from the left and front, putting a lot of pressure on the players. The Purple Bin Chamber of Commerce's Sea Demon Legion, in particular, possessed frightening destructive power in group battles. Moreover, they were the bane of mage players. Every time they wailed, the mage players would suffer a mental blow, which would disrupt their spell trajectories and interrupt their casting. However, the unique characteristic of the players was that they were not afraid of death. It wasn't a problem if they couldn't win. The key was to create profit for the team's profit pool. With the War Glory system, the warrior players were no longer afraid of death. They began to actively choose to sacrifice themselves, hugging the enemy and creating the conditions for their comrades to kill. At that moment, the live chat channels of the various clans were filled with shouts. "Healer, where the hell did you go? Look after my HP. Every time I'm about to run out of HP, I have to drink potions. It's very expensive. What's the use of you?" The healer is a blacksmith. She's smashing the ship with a hammer. I'll transfer the healer of Team 2 over later. Hold on. I've got him. Fire at me. Warriors of the 3rd platoon, hurry up and grab that purple sea demon. This fellow's spiritual attack can deal group damage. It's too powerful. I can't hold it. It's so slippery and disgusting. Assassin from the next team, if you F*** King try to steal the kill again, I'll F*** King attack you. Have some manners. There was no lack of fun in a life-and-death battle. However, against the invasion of the top 10 war merchant guilds, the pressure on the players gradually increased. Under the pressure of the 10 major war chambers of commerce, the front lines began to shift towards Hell City. But this time, the players didn't panic at all. He had even thought about where the soul coins would come from if Hades City was destroyed. Of course, he was going to take it from the members of the Yellow Springs Chamber of Commerce. What they needed to do now was to create as many opportunities as possible to kill them, so that they could earn soul coins and experience. Since the battle had begun, even if they lost, they would not let the Netherworld Chamber of Commerce have it easy. He wanted to let them know what it meant to be continuous, to grow, and multiply endlessly. In the distance, Eldering, who was floating in the air, saw this scene, and a smile appeared on his face. He then turned his head to look at the Sea King. Seeing this, the Sea King smiled faintly. If the player clan was really that weak, they would have been wiped out by him a long time ago. Moreover, the strongest aspect of the player clan was never a head-on battle, but an endless stream of despair and other advantages. This battle was only the beginning. Regardless of the outcome, the Sea King was more inclined to favor the player clan's victory. As for whether the player clan would be able to resist the revenge of the Underworld Chamber of Commerce, the Sea King naturally did not know. However, he was looking forward to it. Compared to the Sea King, the players were much calmer. Just like what the Sea King had thought, the players also believed that the battle had only just begun and that there was still more to come. Even if they lost the Mansion of the Dead, they could still continue to fight. After receiving the news of the Underworld Chamber of Commerce's invasion from the Sea King, many players had prepared their nutrient fluids and were already prepared for a prolonged battle. If one day was not enough, they would fight for a week. If not, they would fight for a month. If not, they would fight for a year without a break. Whoever was a coward, Whoever had a mental breakdown was a coward. Therefore, the players did not have any psychological burden in this battle. All they had to do was fight. The battle lasted for about 3 hours. By then, the front line had been pushed to the center of Liuli district. However, at this moment, there was a sudden explosion in the sky. Then, a black crack appeared and expanded rapidly. While the players and the members of the War Chamber of Commerce were shocked, it suddenly rained. It was the demonic ape rain. Countless demonic apes roared as they descended from the sky. Then, they stepped into the battlefield and began to devour all the lives around them. Why are the materials here too? Is it another big battle? Oh ho, the materials are here too. Interesting, we don't have to travel long distances to earn money. Kill everything. The original battle line instantly became chaotic with the arrival of the demonic apes. To the demonic apes, they did not care about the War Chamber of Commerce or the player clan. In short, all lives should be devoured by them. Therefore, they began to devour the players and the members of the War Chamber of Commerce. The players' thoughts were simple. The demonic apes and the members of the War Chamber of Commerce were their soul coins, experience points, and spiritual materials. No matter which side it was, they had to die. The War Chamber of Commerce was confused. Only the members of the War Chamber of Commerce were dumbfounded. They did not understand what was happening. The arrival of the demonic apes caught the people in charge of the War Chamber of Commerce, including Elder Ing, off guard. Moreover, the combat power displayed by the demonic apes was even more unbelievable. The combat power of a demonic ape was almost equivalent to 10 of them. The powerful demonic ape was even more difficult for Elder Ing to deal with. What's going on? Elder Ing immediately asked in a deep voice. However, he glanced at the Sea King from the corner of his eyes. His meaning was self-evident. I only know part of the player clan secrets. I really don't know. However, I suspect that these creatures are on the player clan's side, the Sea King said with a solemn expression. However, he was actually very calm. If they're on the player clan's side, why are they killing the members of the player clan? Elder Ing immediately asked, "Is there a problem?" The Sea King nodded calmly. He would not be surprised if anything happened to the player clan now. Because he had seen too much, he was numb to it. The days where he was shocked were long gone. If the demonic apes were on the player clan's side, why would they kill the members of the player clan? The Sea King thought it was easy to explain. After all, the members of the player clan would also kill their own people when they went crazy. Therefore, it was normal. It was very reasonable. Was there anything wrong? With the arrival of the demonic apes, the battlefield changed. At this moment, the demonic apes were in control of the battlefield. They were like tanks that crushed the battlefield, killing and devouring without restraint. However, gradually, the demonic apes realized that they could not absorb the bloodline power after devouring the members of the player clan. Therefore, between the player clan and the members of the Underworld War Chamber of Commerce, they decisively chose to devour the members of the Underworld War Chamber of Commerce. Under the bloody massacre, many members of the War Chamber of Commerce were horrified. To them, the demonic apes were simply demons, a terrifying existence that could not be defeated. They had extremely strong skin defense and powerful attacks. They were simply not on the same level of life. Under such an attack, Elder Ing realized that the situation was not good. He immediately took out a mark from his body, activated it, and threw it into the sky. The mark blossomed with blinding light in the air, then disappeared into the sky. The battle below was still going on. Compared to the War Chamber of Commerce, the players were still very calm. The only thing that troubled the players was that the members of the demonic apes were not easy to kill without the soul-devouring beasts. It would be great if they could retrieve the soul-devouring beasts. This was the thought on all the players' minds. At this moment, a majestic troop suddenly appeared from the northwest of the battlefield. It was the European server's army that had rushed all the way here. Looking at the huge battlefield that covered the entire Liuli district, the European server players were very excited. They hurriedly followed the army and began to charge. Sure enough, there's meat to eat by following the original server. We've made a killing this time. We're rich. Ha! It looks like this battle won't end in a short time. Luckily, I've stocked up on nutrient fluids. Kill. This is a big battlefield. Let's fight to the end of this battle. When the soul coins in the team's profit pool exceed 1,000,000, we can get more. I'll charge first. At this moment, the European server players were very excited. Such a huge battlefield represented countless resources and benefits. After this battle, they believed that the combat power of the European server would definitely increase to a new level. With such a feeling, the European server players' blood was ignited. They roared and rushed into the battlefield. Then, they were hammered to death. The level of this battle was so high that even the original server players were having a hard time dealing with it, let alone the European server players. The moment they entered the battlefield, they were attacked by the members of the demonic apes and the War Chamber of Commerce. In an instant, a large number of players died. At this moment, the European server players were having a mental breakdown. Seeing this scene, the original server players could not help but grin. In this battle, they were fighting and retreating, trying their best to maximize the benefits. They were taking the path of a protracted war. However, the European server players actually wanted to tear an opening and charge into the center of the battlefield. In the eyes of the original server players, they must be crazy about soul coins. What was the saying again? Different circles could not be forced to integrate. Obviously, the European server players did not realize this. At this moment, they were in a complete mess. The original server players watched and could not help but laugh. At the same time, they typed 666 in the regional live chat channel to show their welcome. Chapter 679. The miserable state of the European server players made the players from the original server, who were fighting to the death, laugh out loud. Although they already knew that the European server players were paying attention to the original server forum and wanted to get a share of the battle, they did not expect the European server players to come at this time. This was because even they were prepared to lose this battle because the enemy was too strong. At this moment, the European server players were full of admiration for the European server players who dared to attack the center of the battlefield in such an environment. Very wild, very gamer. At this moment, many of the original server players could not help but type 666 in the regional channel, cheering for the wild European server players. But soon, the original server players could not laugh anymore. In the battle, other than killing the opponents to obtain soul coins and experience, there was one more thing that the original server players had to do. That was to pick up a wave of materials while the Underworld Chamber of Commerce was killing the demonic apes. The players from the European server quickly realized this. They swarmed toward the demonic apes that had fallen to the ground during the battle. Seeing this scene, the original server players could not hold it in anymore. European server dogs, put down the materials. This is too much. I don't care about you guys stealing the monsters. There are so many of them anyway. You guys are courting death by stealing the materials. F***CK. You put the materials into the channel right in front of me. I'll smash your head, spit them out, grabbing the neck and shaking. The friendship between the players was so easily broken. At this moment, the original server players attacked without hesitation. All kinds of spells flew toward the European server players. The frontline warriors also changed their direction and attacked the European server army. He could tolerate anything, but he could not let go of the expensive materials. Therefore, under the shocked gazes of Elder Ing and the higher-ups of the War Chamber of Commerce, the players began to kill each other. The battlefield became even more chaotic in an instant. The battle area was divided into two parts. On one side was the battle between the demonic apes and the Underworld Chamber of Commerce, and on the other side was the battle between the original server players and the European server players. At this moment, the only one who was calm was the Sea King. Seeing the shock on the faces of Elder Ing and the others, the Sea King could not help but show a look of contempt. This was normal operation. What was there to be surprised about? Country bumpkins who had not seen much. At this moment, Elder Ing turned to look at the Sea King and the others and said, "Sea King, go to the back of the sea and hold the fort. The rest of you, attack with me." Upon hearing this, the Sea King did not hesitate at all. He decisively turned around and headed in the direction of the sea. Such a terrifying war. He did not want to stay a moment longer. Although he did not know why Elder Ing was taking such good care of him, but he must definitely grab hold of such an opportunity. fighting and killing. Who knows if there would be no one left? It was much more comfortable to sit back and watch the show. Therefore, the Sea King decided to leave. Although the rest of the people in charge of the War Merchants Guild were displeased, they still chose to listen to Elder Ying's orders and followed him to charge towards the Demon Ape clan who were in the midst of a massacre. With the addition of Elder Ying and the others, the pressure on the members of the Underworld Merchant Guild was greatly reduced. But Elder Ying soon ran into trouble as well. A demon ape with its back covered in white fur stared at him, and in that short exchange of blows, Elder Ying was shocked to discover that the power displayed by the demon ape was something that he found hard to defend against. There were many such powerful demonic apes on the battlefield, and more were still falling from the sky. Elder Ying's heart was filled with shock, unable to imagine what kind of species these demon apes were to be so terrifying. But at that moment, he could only grit his teeth and deal with them. At the same time, he suddenly felt a little excited. Just now, he had activated the communication sigil. Soon, the higher-ups of the Underworld Devouring Sea Division would receive his message and send it to the Underworld headquarters in the Central Sea. As long as support arrived, he believed that both the Player Clan and the Demon Apes would die. Although he hated the Underworld Merchant Guild, he had to admit that the Underworld Merchant Guild was powerful. And these powerful Demon Apes would also make the Underworld Merchant Guild pay a certain price. This was something that Elder Ying was very happy to see. As a descendant of a Shadow Clan who was lurking in the Underworld Merchant Guild, he was looking forward to what was about to happen next. Below, the battle between the players was getting more and more intense. Shouts and curses could be heard in the live chat channel. The players from the original server were scolding the players from the European server for not knowing their limits and only knowing how to snatch materials and equipment. The players from the European server were scolding the players from the original server for being bastards who only knew how to monopolize. The battlefield was not owned by the original server, so why couldn't they just pick up materials? Hence, the conflict intensified. Moreover, the players from the two servers were already at odds with each other, so they were merciless when they fought. At the same time, whenever they saw a demon ape falling next to them, they would pounce in that direction with bloodshot eyes. Then, they would beat each other up again. Seeing the players killing each other so fiercely, the members of the Underworld Merchant Guild who were fighting were dumbfounded. They were even a little embarrassed to attack again. Moreover, the demon apes seemed to be targeting them. Hence, the members of the Underworld Merchant Guild decisively focused all their firepower on the demon apes. At this moment, the battle was completely chaotic. The target of the Underworld Merchant Guild was the Player Clan, and the target of the demon apes was the Player Clan. However, by chance, they ended up fighting each other. At this moment, Lu Wu, who was watching the battle from behind the scenes, was so shocked that the chips in his hand fell to the ground. He subconsciously rubbed Lil Bei, Li's head, and let out a sigh. Compared to the center of Liuli District, where the battle was the most intense, a fierce battle was also taking place in the forest by the coast. The battle between the Illusion Fish Clan and the Bloodstained Merchant Guild had also entered a white-hot stage. At this moment, above the forest, Huan Sha and Shuaran were engaged in a fierce battle. Shuaran had always heard Huan Sha's famous name. However, he only realized how terrifying he was after fighting him. The flawless concealment technique, the ghostly movement technique, and the unexpected attack all made him miserable. Fortunately, as a member of the Armored Sea Dragon clan, he had extremely strong physical defense. Otherwise, he would be killed in such a battle. However, he knew that he couldn't continue like this. If he continued to be exhausted by Huan Sha, he would be the one to die in the battle, not Huan Sha. At this thought, Shuaran's expression turned sinister. He gritted his teeth and made a decision. At this moment, Huan Sha's figure suddenly appeared on his left. With a cold flash, he stabbed his steel trident at his left rib. However, this time, Shuaran didn't choose to dodge or defend. Instead, he reached out and grabbed Huan Sha's neck. The sound of a sharp blade piercing through flesh resounded. At the same time, Shuaran grabbed Huan Sha. The sudden burst of bone-chilling coldness in his body made Shuaran shiver. Then he spat out a mouthful of blood. However, he knew that this sacrifice was worth it. Against Huan Sha, he couldn't rely on defense to defeat him. He could only choose to sacrifice part of his body in exchange for a chance to counterattack. Huan Sha was a member of the Illusion Fish clan. Although his assassination ability was extremely strong, his physical defense was extremely weak. Now that Xueran had caught him, victory was at hand. Thinking of this, Xueran's expression turned sinister. His cheating arm suddenly erupted with power and grabbed Huan Sha's neck tightly. Then, he suddenly punched at Huan Sha. However, something unexpected happened. Not only did Huan Sha not choose to defend, but he also sent his steel trident into Xueran's body, taking the punch head-on. At this moment, both of them spat out blood at the same time. Xueran couldn't help but shiver, and his body stiffened. However, he didn't stop. He immediately punched again. At this moment, he had gained the advantage. He was sure that if Huan Sha wanted to live, he would definitely choose to defend. However, it was obvious that Huan Sha didn't want that. When Xueran punched Huan Sha's face, causing it to cave in, Huan Sha raised his steel trident and pierced Xueran's lung. F***ck your lungs. Puffed. Xueran coughed up blood again. His expression was one of disbelief. Do you want to die? Huan Sha didn't say anything because his head was completely cracked. He was only relying on his consciousness to support himself. At this moment, Xueran noticed that Huan Sha's arm was trembling. At this moment, Xueran couldn't hold on any longer because he realized that Huan Sha really didn't want to live anymore. He wanted to die together with him. Therefore, he decisively threw Huan Sha away, turned around, and sped toward the sea, scattering red dots along the way. Lunatic, lunatic! He's obviously from the assassin clan, but he wants to die together with me. What a lunatic! Xueran cursed in his heart as he sped toward the sea. However, as he flew, his speed became slower and slower. The cold that kept erupting in his body made him shiver from time to time, and blood kept flowing out of his mouth. As the injuries in his body worsened, Xueran started to feel the fear of death. He immediately took out a pill and popped it into his mouth. Then, he picked up his speed and flew in the direction of the Sea King. At this moment, there was a huge battle going on in Liuli District. Flying there would be suicidal. Therefore, the only person he could ask for help from was the Sea King. Xueran endured the pain and discomfort in his body and arrived at the back of the sea, which was the area where the Mute fleet had sealed off the sea. Then, he fell toward the leading Mute fleet's warship. Thud! He fell heavily on the deck with a loud thud. Get the Sea King here, Xueran said with a ferocious face as he lifted his head to look at the surprised Mute soldiers around him. As he spoke, he couldn't help but cough out a mouthful of blood. The nearby Mute soldiers looked at each other, but they still chose to turn around and inform the Sea King. Soon, the Sea King, who had received the news, rushed over. When he saw Xueran in a sorry state, he had a strange look on his face. Brother, what happened to you? Sea King, save me. Xueran coughed out a mouthful of blood and looked at the Sea King with a pale face. No problem. The Sea King immediately took a step forward and helped Xueran up from the ground. Then, he helped him sit down and injected his energy into Xueran's body to check on his condition. Help me expel the chill in my body. Quick, it's constantly destroying the vitality in my body, Xueran said in a hoarse voice. The Sea King nodded, but did not act immediately. Instead, he continued to check on Xueran. After confirming that Xueran's body was in a terrible condition, the Sea King suddenly smiled. At this moment, a ray of light shone on his forehead and the Death's Light wheel appeared in his hand. He stabbed it into Xueran's right chest and pierced through his heart. You? Why? Xueran's body trembled as he looked at the Sea King in disbelief. In fact, he had thought about asking the Sea King for help. Although the top 10 war chambers of commerce did not like each other, they were not competitors. This was because they were all qualified to be part of the war chambers of commerce. However, he did not expect the Sea King to suddenly intervene. At this moment, the Sea King suddenly moved his mouth close to his ear and whispered, I'm sorry, I'm actually a spy. The vitality in Xueran's body was completely depleted. He died with his eyes wide open. Chapter 680. After killing Shuron, the Sea King calmly signaled his subordinates to search his body. The Sea King did not hesitate after collecting all the valuables on Shwedi's body. He kicked Shwedi's corpse into the sea and fed it to the fishes. The Sea King had no qualms about killing one of the people in charge of the War Chamber of Commerce. After all, he had inherited the inheritance of a Shadow clan. In the future, fighting against the Yellow Springs Chamber of Commerce was a path he would have to take. Moreover, there was a fierce battle in Liuli district at this time. Who would know that he had killed Shuron? Even if he was asked, he would say that he didn't see it. That's why I'm so calm. Thinking of this, the Sea King grinned. His body then floated into the air and began to look in the direction of Liuli district, observing the battle royale there. This was the first time the Sea King felt so happy watching someone fight to the death. This melon was really delicious. In the direction of Liuli district, the battle continued. At this moment, even if Elder Ing and the others were to attack with all their might, they were still no match for the Demon Ape clan's powerful battle prowess. As more and more demonic apes descended from the sky, someone finally couldn't take it anymore. They did not have the fearless mentality of the player clan. To many members of the War Commerce Chamber, death was the end. Moreover, they couldn't see any hope of victory against the demonic ape tribe. Therefore, they felt that there was no hope for them to continue fighting. The first to choose to escape was the leader of the Dragonhorn fleet. His figure twisted in the air to turn into a long snake to fly into the distance, not even bothering to bid farewell to Elder Ing. Although he feared Elder Ing, but at the juncture of life and death, he still chose to live on. As for whether the Underworld Chamber of Commerce would seek revenge in the future, he couldn't care less about it now. He had to survive first. As Jiao fled, the leader of the Sword Crown fleet's heart wavered. At this moment, he suddenly turned around and followed. When the remaining guild leaders saw this scene, their hearts wavered. However, while they gritted their teeth and persevered, they too had thoughts of leaving. Seeing that the two guild leaders had chosen to flee, the War Chamber of Commerce's members, who were fighting below, lost their morale, and their combat power fell by a notch. Facing the ferocious attacks of the demonic ape race, they were like lambs waiting to be slaughtered, especially when they saw their companions being devoured by the ferocious demonic ape. The mental blow caused them to tremble in fear. At that moment, Elder Ying's face was ashen. However, he was powerless to stop the people in charge of the War Merchant Guild from leaving. At this time, he could not even protect himself. Under the attacks of the ferocious demon ape, he could only try his best to dodge. At the same time, he cursed in his heart why the reinforcements had not arrived yet. At this moment, a crack suddenly appeared in the sky, and 3 figures emerged from it. The leader was wearing a golden robe. He stood on the head of an azure dragon and looked coldly at the battle below. At that moment, his gaze suddenly locked onto the figure of Elder Ing, who was dressed in the branch elder's long robes, and his figure immediately disappeared from where he stood. When he reappeared, he was already right before Elder Ing. Elder Ing, who swallowed the sea region? You were the one who sent out the call for help. The man's expression was cold as he asked Elder Ing. Lord Divine Envoy, it's me. When Elder Ing heard it, he immediately replied with a look of pleasant surprise. The man nodded in response. Then, he reached behind him and made a grabbing motion. In an instant, the demonic ape let out a howl of agony as it was crushed into a pile of meat paste by an invisible force. Looking at the divine envoy killing the devil ape that he had been unable to defeat so easily, Elder Ying's body shuddered. He knew that this was the true power of the Netherworld. As for the various branches of the Netherworld Chamber of Commerce and the outside world, they were just agencies set up by the headquarters to collect money from the outside world. Only the Netherworld Chamber of Commerce in the Central Sea region was able to deter the various forces of the major sea regions, causing them to not dare to act rashly. And the man in front of him was from a Netherworld Chamber of Commerce in the Central Sea region, and his strength had reached the divine realm. Explain the situation to me in detail. The man spoke at that moment. Although the sounds of battle were deafening and the members of the Netherworld Chamber of Commerce were dying one after another, it was as if he did not care at all. He did not choose to help immediately, but asked Elder Ing instead. When Elder Ing saw that, he cursed in his heart. However, he still honestly explained what happened here and purposely pretended to be seriously injured to slow down his speech because he did not care whether the members of the Netherworld Chamber of Commerce around him died or not. After listening to Elder Ying's description, the divine envoy turned his head to look at the crack in space and immediately showed a look of disdain. To be able to tear the crack in space so easily, it must be a divine realm expert like him. But so what? He was a god that could stand tall in the central sea region of the Netherworld, and not an ordinary god could fight against him. At that moment, his heart was the same as Haka when he first came to Beiki, full of disdain towards the outside world. Because in his eyes, the gods from the outside world were just trash that could not stand in an area full of powerhouses. On the other hand, he came from the most powerful central sea region of the Netherworld, so he was on a higher level. Thinking of this, the divine envoy turned his head to look at the other two divine envoys and nodded. Seeing that, the other two divine envoys flew down abruptly. A purple ribbon flew out from one of their sleeves and began to wander around the battlefield at a speed that was hard to be seen by the naked eye. All the demonic apes that touched the ribbon could not help but let out a scream before their bodies instantly melted into a pool of blood. This caused one of the divine envoys to take out a golden scroll. As he muttered softly, a visible wave of magical energy rippled around him. It was the same pardon of the sea god, but the one in his hand was completely different from the one in the hands of the Sea King and the others. As he shouted softly, countless water elemental giants were condensed around him, and they crashed downward, fighting with the demonic apes. Relying on their limitless regenerative bodies, the water elemental giants exploded with combat power that could fight against the demonic apes. With the addition of these water elemental giants, the demonic apes lost their advantage and could only wait to be killed. At that moment, the leader of the divine envoys flew toward the crack in space where the demonic apes were still falling. At that moment, his idea was very simple, and that was to pass through the crack in space and kill the god behind scenes. As for the demonic apes below, he could leave them to the other two companions who came with him. Arriving at the mouth of the crack, the divine envoy looked at the demonic apes that were swarming toward him. He waved his hand forward, and the spiritual energy of heaven and earth gathered and condensed into a ball in his palm. It kept expanding, and in the blink of an eye, it turned into a scorching ball of light with a diameter of more than 100 meters. He then threw it toward the direction of the crack in space. Instantly, countless demonic apes that were falling were swallowed by the ball of light, and a sudden explosion killed a large number of demonic apes at the back of the passage. However, the expected spatial tremors did not occur. The space passage that was attacked was still extremely strong, and not even a crack appeared. Seeing this, the divine envoy's expression turned serious. As a god on the underworld god list, are you sure you want to challenge me? At that moment, a deep voice suddenly sounded from the other end of the space. Hearing this, the divine envoy's expression turned serious, but he still said without hesitation, "You are the one who is challenging the Netherworld Chamber of Commerce. It is you who is challenging my Underworld Chamber of Commerce. It is not too late to stop now. Otherwise, you know what the consequences will be. The Netherworld Chamber of Commerce? I think I've heard of it. Is it very powerful?" A sneer came from the passage. "How dare you offend the Netherworld Chamber of Commerce?" Hearing this, the divine envoy's expression turned pale, and then he immediately moved toward the crack. As a god on the side of the Netherworld Chamber of Commerce, he had a strong sense of belonging to the Netherworld Chamber of Commerce. Now that he was provoked, he naturally could not tolerate it anymore, and immediately chose to attack. "Don't come over, it's just a waste of time. I'll send you to reincarnation." As soon as the voice fell, the divine envoy, who had just stepped into the space passage, suddenly saw a long black stick flying toward him. Realizing that the god on the other end of the space had attacked him, the divine envoy sneered and raised his hand to grab the black stick, wanting to refine it. However, The moment his palm came into contact with the black iron stick, the divine envoy's face suddenly turned pale, and he could not help but cough out a mouthful of golden blood. An unparalleled, vast power came from the iron stick, instantly shattering the spiritual chi circulation in his body, and even draining the accumulated spiritual chi in his body. At that moment, his figure retreated rapidly, and in the blink of an eye, he was pushed out of the space passage. At that moment, the divine envoy realized that something was wrong. He immediately wanted to escape from the pressure of the black iron stick, but at that moment, he was shocked to find that he could not move. As he watched in horror, the black iron stick expanded with the wind, and in the blink of an eye, it turned into a huge stick that reached the sky and smashed into the ground with a loud bang. Dong! The huge black iron stick pierced the ground. The earth shook, and the ground instantly cracked. Strong winds swept in all directions, stirring up sand and dust, making it difficult to open one's eyes. Under this attack, the world suddenly changed, and countless space cracks were torn in all directions. They quickly disappeared, and then reappeared. The players and the members of the Underworld Chamber of Commerce who were fighting nearby were all turned into dust by the violent power of this attack. Only the members of the Demon Ape clan were not harmed by this attack. It was as if all the power had automatically avoided the members of the Demon Ape clan. At that moment, other than Elder Ing and a few other experts, the rest of the lives were wiped out. At that moment, the smiles on the faces of the other two divine envoys froze, and they revealed expressions of disbelief. How is this possible? The power of an ancient god. Jin Zhu is dead. I can't feel the undulations of his soul power. Realizing that their companion had died, they completely panicked. They had thought that it was just a provocation from an external force that they could easily resolve. But it was clear that this time, things were not as they had imagined. The two divine envoys subconsciously looked at Elder Ing and asked with fear on their faces, "Who did you offend? Why didn't you inform us in advance?" Elder Ing, who had exhausted his strength, opened his mouth weakly, but did not know how to answer, and only felt bitter in his heart. An ancient god? I thought it was just an ordinary god. At that moment, the players from the original server and the European server who were engaged in a fierce battle looked at the gradually dimming interface, and they were all dumbfounded. Although he was already dead, the live chat channel exploded in an instant. The players from the original server and the European server were spamming the screen with. Many players only saw a black iron stick suddenly appear in the sky, and then, there was no then. Whoosh! It was too fast, so fast that they were caught off guard. They did not even have the time to shout words like F *CK and awesome. Although the players could not shout F *CK, the Sea King, who was watching the battle from afar, subconsciously blurted out, F *CK. That's awesome. He was so familiar with his words that he could no longer change them. Chapter 681. The appearance of the black iron rod ended the battle in an instant. Lili District was smashed into smithereens. Violent energy swept out, turning everything in its path into dust. Such godly power not only stunned the players who were still fighting, but also the remaining two divine envoys from the Yellow Springs trading firm. At this moment, they knew that they were wrong. This wasn't a god from the suburbs, but an ancient god realm master they couldn't fight against. They were filled with resentment towards the Yellow Springs branch of the Devouring Sea Domain for not sending such important information to the headquarters, causing them to fall into danger. But the situation was urgent, and they didn't have time to think. They each took out a talisman, activated it, and threw it into the air. The two talismans shone brilliantly in the air. At this moment, an arm covered in white hair slowly stretched out from the spatial crack at the side, and with a vast power, it grabbed the two gods' envoys. The situation was urgent. The two divine envoys acted at the same time, circulating their strength to form layers of defensive barriers in front of them. Boom! At the moment of impact, the giant white arm broke through the layers of defensive barriers and slammed into the two divine envoys. The two divine envoys from the Yellow Springs trading firm were instantly sent flying by the powerful force. Their bodies were injured in one blow, and the spiritual energy in their bodies was depleted in order to block the attack. But before they could recover, the giant arm reached for them again. At this moment, their faces were ashen. Such a powerful force wasn't something they could withstand. Moreover, they were sure that the ancient god behind the spatial crack was not an ordinary ancient god realm god, but an even more terrifying existence. Before the giant arm reached them, a fierce gust of wind enveloped them, making them feel the threat of death. But just as the giant arm was about to hit them, the two glowing talismans in the sky suddenly tore open a spatial crack, and a figure emerged from it. In an instant, time slowed down, and the air seemed to freeze. The newcomer wore a golden robe with the word Yellow Springs embroidered on the back. A sword-shaped divine seal was imprinted between his brows, and he carried an ancient bronze longsword on his back. He stood proudly in the sky with his hands behind his back. His calm eyes were filled with vicissitudes of life, as if he had seen through the vicissitudes of time and history. Along with his appearance, the devil ape Venerable's huge palm suddenly retracted. Then countless sharp sword auras appeared in the place where the devil ape Venerable had been standing. As they intersected, countless tiny spatial cracks appeared. Venerable's sword. Master. Upon seeing this person, the two Yellow Springs divine emissaries, who thought that they had escaped death, were overjoyed. They immediately lowered their heads and paid their respects to the figure hovering in the air. Venerable's sword didn't reply, and his indifferent eyes looked at the spatial crack. As an ancient god realm god, it isn't appropriate to attack a junior. So what? Venerable devil ape's voice came from within the spatial crack. Upon hearing this, a golden light shone from Venerable's sword's glabella. His body did not move, but countless sword auras formed out of thin air and shot towards the crack in space. In an instant, the spatial crack shook and was divided into countless pieces. Then, it was slowly repaired and hidden by the invisible power of the laws. However, after the sword chi flew through the spatial passageway, Sword Venerable's face suddenly turned solemn. Suddenly receiving a cry for help from a junior, Huang Xiaolong rushed over immediately. When he saw the giant white arm, he was certain that the person behind the space crack was as strong as him, an ancient god realm master. Although the honorable swordsman was surprised, he did not find it difficult to deal with. Because in a battle of the same cultivation realm, besides the individual experts in the Central Sea region, he was able to suppress all of them with the divine seal of the Sword Tao. Therefore, he was not worried at all when facing the venerable devil ape. However, when the heart sword eye, accompanied by the sword chi, penetrated the space crack and arrived at the other end, Sword Venerable's body trembled. The rich spiritual chi fluctuations around him made him realize that this was no ordinary place. After a careful examination, he was shocked to discover that this was actually the Naraka realm. There were two places in the underworld where experts gathered. On the mainland, the strongest was the Naraka realm. It was a new world formed from the body of the strongest expert below the Emperor realm, Xitigarbha. There were 18 world boundaries inside, attracting countless experts to set foot on this land. Countless gods' realm and ancient god realm experts were born in the Naraka realm. The Naraka realm was on a completely different level compared to the other big domains on the mainland. The most famous and complicated spell system in the underworld, the Naraka realm, was born in this land. Equally famous as the Naraka realm was in the direction of the sea region, the place closest to the 6 paths of reincarnation. It was also the Yellow Springs sea god's resting place, the Yellow Springs Central Sea. That place was rich in spiritual materials with divinity. It was a holy land of resources that even the gods yearned for. It was also the place where the battle for supremacy in the sea region was the most intense. On one side was the strongest on the mainland, and on the other side was the strongest in the sea region. Both sides were home to a group of top experts from the underworld. After discovering that the figure behind the space crack was a Naraka realm expert, the honorable swordsman's face turned solemn. He knew that he had met his match this time. Yellow Springs trading firm, honorable swordsman. At this moment, the honorable swordsman took the initiative to disperse his sword chi. He looked at the space crack and spoke. His voice condensed into a force that pierced through the space crack and arrived at the other end. I don't want to know who you are. If you want to fight, let's fight. The honorable demonic ape replied without hesitation. This attitude made the honorable swordsman very embarrassed. However, at this moment, he really didn't want to become enemies with a powerful expert like the honorable demonic ape. It wasn't because he was afraid. It was because a new batch of spiritual materials with divinity had been born near the 6 paths of reincarnation recently. This had caused the Yellow Springs Central Sea to become turbulent. The battle between the major forces for the spiritual materials had intensified. It was a very unwise choice for the Yellow Springs Chamber of Commerce to make an enemy of a Naraka realm expert at this time. How about we each take a step back? The honorable swordsman continued to speak in a negotiating tone. I killed one of your juniors. Are you sure you want to each take a step back? The honorable demonic ape's tone was slightly sarcastic. Hearing this, the honorable swordsman was furious. You really want to become enemies with the Yellow Springs Chamber of Commerce? You alone aren't enough to become enemies with the Yellow Springs Chamber of Commerce. The honorable demonic ape couldn't help but burst into laughter when he heard this. He had never been afraid of opponents who were stronger than him. Before he became a god, he dared to become enemies with the powerful Corpse Clan. He fought against several Corpse Clan gods with his demigod realm cultivation base. He even broke through to the god realm during the battle and fought the Corpse Clan head-on. After that, he dared to become enemies with the ancient god realm Corpse God with his god realm cultivation base. In the end, he defeated the Corpse God step by step and took everything from him. Therefore, the honorable swordsman's threat was useless to the honorable demonic ape. Instead, it made him a little excited. However, just as the honorable demonic ape was about to respond, he suddenly looked at the dozens of little apes climbing on his body. At this moment, a hint of warmth appeared on his ferocious face, and the battle intent in his heart disappeared. This was because he suddenly remembered the time when he was enemies with the Corpse Clan. At that time, he was also fearless. However, it didn't mean that his clansmen weren't afraid. Even though he had the courage to become enemies with the Corpse God, he didn't have the ability to protect his clansmen. In the end, he was the only one left in this world while all his clansmen died. In the days that followed, the long period of loneliness made him feel extremely painful. Now that he had reforged the bodies of his clansmen and allowed them to be reborn, Venerable Devil Ape suddenly realized that the boundless battle intent in his heart seemed to be restrained because of this. The Honorable Sword's question seemed to be directed at the Honorable Demonic Ape. Can you still accept the loneliness of having all your clansmen die? After a moment of silence, the Venerable Devil Ape took a deep breath and spoke slowly. Since that's the case, let's each take a step back and leave. Facing such an arrogant Venerable Devil Ape, Venerable Sword was already prepared to retaliate. But when he heard that Venerable Devil Ape was willing to compromise, he couldn't help but be stunned. All right, but I absolutely can't let the matter rest with the death of my junior. In the future, I'll definitely head to the path of hell to seek guidance from you. I'll wait for you. After Paragon Devil Ape finished speaking with a thought, the black iron rod that pierced through the ground suddenly rose up from the ground. It passed through the spatial crack and arrived beside Paragon Devil Ape. Immediately after, countless devil apes were pulled into the sky by a powerful suction force, flying into the spatial crack. At the sight of this, the players who were watching the battle in gray screen mode wailed. Fight! Why aren't you fighting anymore? Didn't you say that the coward would be the coward? The epic of the year ended with an opening cinematic? Did I die in vain? Come out, UB asterisk start official. If I don't see them fight to the death today, I won't be able to rest in peace. I thought that after watching the battle, we would resurrect and collect the corpses. I didn't expect it to end just like that. F asterisk CK, Crayon Shinchan. I won't be able to rest in peace. F asterisk King official. Come out and change the development of the plot. Shouldn't we be fighting to the death? There's definitely something wrong with your script. We must fix this bug. It seems like the venerable devil ape is going to start a war with the underworld chamber of commerce. I've already thought about the development of the plot. The war should be getting more and more intense. Then, the entire underworld Central Sea and the Naraka realm will start a war. Then, we players will laugh and watch them fight. We'll make a fortune from the war and finally become the strongest force in the underworld. Then, we'll attack the outworld. Obviously, the script is wrong now. UB asterisk start official. It's all your fault for coming out and getting beaten up. Lu Wu was dumbfounded as he looked at the players' comments in the regional channel. I was eating chips with Lil Bei Li and watching the battle. How did I end up being the scapegoat? Whether they fight or not, it's none of my business. A bunch of B asterisk TCHY players. They're out of control. I'll remember this grudge. It's not that the time hasn't come yet. Just when the players thought that the war was over, an unexpected scene appeared. After all the devil apes flew into the space rift, the space rift slowly closed. Venerable Sword led Elder Ing and the others toward the direction of the sea. However, at this moment, the closed space rift suddenly tore open again. Then, a gigantic black iron rod suddenly emerged from it and crashed toward Venerable Sword and the others. Venerable Sword immediately sensed the energy fluctuation coming from behind. The sword Tao Divine Seal on his forehead shone with a dazzling light. The bronze longsword on his back was unsheathed and expanded with the wind. In the blink of an eye, it turned into a gigantic sword and stabbed toward the black iron rod. The scene was truly unexpected, and the players who were cursing were also stunned. Seeing that the battle had started again, the regional live chat channel was flooded with 666. The spectators from both the local server and the European server were pleasantly surprised. They all felt that the venerable devil ape was simply a cunning old fox. I like it. Chapter 682. The strike was ferocious, but fortunately, the venerable sword responded in time. The moment the giant sword collided with the iron rod, his figure flashed, tearing the space apart and disappearing with Elder Ing and the others. The venerable sword's judgment was undoubtedly correct. The iron rod pressed down on the giant sword and hit the area where he was originally at. A spider web suddenly appeared in the space, and the space shattered like glass, revealing countless space cracks. After missing its target, the iron rod tore a space tunnel in front of it and disappeared into it, chasing after the venerable sword. As the two space cracks in the sky slowly closed, everything returned to its original state. The players, the Sea King who was watching the battle from afar. At this moment, the players and the Sea King were dumbfounded. They thought they could witness the battle with their own eyes, but it seemed like they did not intend to fight here at all. Instead, they moved to another place. The irascible players wailed again. At this moment, Lu Wu was the only one who could see the battle. Relying on his privilege, he immediately turned the camera and pointed it at the venerable demonic ape and the venerable sword who were fighting across space. Just now, Lu Wu noticed a strange scene. Under the artifact's monitoring, the black iron rod seemed to send a message. After the message appeared, the venerable demonic ape who had chosen to stop the battle suddenly attacked again. This made Lu Wu wonder if there was someone behind the venerable demonic ape. The message was like an order. He could tell that the venerable demonic ape had the intention to compromise, but he changed his mind after receiving the message. Thinking of this, Lu Wu decisively tracked the iron rod's trajectory in space and pointed the camera at it. At this moment, the giant cocoon in the center of the heavenly realm had opened again, and the Grand Supreme who was inside had a smile on his face. The time had come, and he decided to take advantage of this opportunity to stir up trouble. Do you think you can stop fighting just because you say so? Have you asked me? As the battle began, Lu Wu was ready to watch the drama unfold. However, as he watched, he suddenly did not want to watch anymore. In a battle across space, the venerable sword summoned his divine seal, sword to cross space. However, the iron rod was firmly behind him, so the venerable sword could not get his hands on his sword. He could only cross space to temporarily dodge. This led to a scene that left Lu Wu speechless. Venerable Sword's figure appeared somewhere in the underworld, followed by the iron rod. Venerable Sword, who had no other choice, tore the space to escape again. The iron rod immediately followed. At this time, Venerable Sword's divine seal sword also arrived. However, the sword master had already left. The divine seal sword could only tear through space and continue to follow the sword master. Three sides, one chasing the other, shuttling back and forth endlessly. The camera kept switching wildly. Luwu felt like he was going to throw up. Within a second, countless cameras flashed past, and the scene was constantly flickering. How could he endure this? Luwu watched for about an hour. He was speechless when he realized that the scene was still the same. He immediately lost interest. I'm not going to watch anymore. I'm not going to watch anymore. I'm just going to fight and crazily switch screens. As for the outcome of the battle, Luwu planned to find out more about it after the battle officially began. I won't be accompanying you for now. Although Luwu did not plan to continue watching the battle, he sent a message to the 6 paths of reincarnation through the artifact. The change in the venerable demonic ape made Luwu feel very suspicious. This was because he knew that the great emperor of the underworld had never cared about the battles between the forces of the underworld. As an ancient god, other than the great emperor of the underworld, who else could command the venerable demonic ape? Therefore, he decided to inform the strongest big shots of the underworld. This message floated in the 6 paths of reincarnation and was quickly captured by the great emperor of the Dongyu. After checking it, the great emperor of the Dong shook his head gently and smiled. What's the matter? At this moment, a voice sounded beside the great emperor of the Dongyu. Fengdu, do you remember the ancient god demonic ape? The person behind it has made his move. Ha! That rod should be the Taishang's Tai Ching rod. Does he really think he can control the demonic ape? It's wishful thinking. Don't forget that the demonic ape clan was born from the evolved body of Xidagarba. Xidagarba's blood flows in their bodies. Although it's thin, it's enough. The great emperor of the Dong could not help but laugh when he thought of the Xidagarba who dared to shake the heaven realm. The person with the chess piece thinks that he controls the chess game, but he doesn't know that the chess piece has never been of one mind. Ridiculous, ridiculous. The battle ended with the departure of the demonic ape Venerable and the sword Venerable. The players did not expect the Mansion of the Dead to remain unscathed after the battle. 3 hours later, the players resurrected in the main city one after another, and the forum began to discuss the situation of the battle. There were even professional players who started live streaming and analyzing who had the highest chance of winning the battle. These players did have the ability to analyze the situation of the battle and not make baseless claims. Due to the huge historical knowledge stored in the library, the players could analyze the battle from all angles. With a complete view of the world, everything was traceable. Therefore, the forum was bustling with all kinds of bets, and the players expressed their opinions. When there were different opinions, they would take out screenshots of the historical records and explain the battle according to the content. For example, take a look at the history of the Underworld C, Volume 5, Chapter 1742. The sword Venerable of the Underworld is a powerhouse who rarely has a match in the same realm. He has killed many deities. How can he lose? Another example was, what do you know? The demonic ape Venerable was able to fight the corpse deity when he was only in the god realm. Go read the history twice before you come here. How can you show off if you are uncultured? Don't think that you can use the history of the sword Venerable of the Underworld to show off. You are too weak. There were even players who did not want to argue with these players who had some historical knowledge. They simply said, I don't care what history you have. I'm betting on the demonic ape Venerable's victory. If he loses, I'll livestream myself eating sh*t. Who dares to bet with me? Just like the forum of the local server, the forum of the European server was also bustling. It could be said that the players did not lose anything in this battle. Although they died en masse, they did not lose anything. The 10 war chambers of commerce suffered the most. They originally had a great advantage in this battle. However, as the demonic ape Venerable attacked, everything turned into nothingness and was sent into the 6 paths of reincarnation. It was so tragic that the players felt it was a pity. Of course, it was a pity that so many soul coins and experience points disappeared just like that. As for the Sea King, who was watching the battle from the back of the sea region, he was relieved after the demonic ape Venerable and the sword Venerable disappeared. After witnessing the entire battle, cold sweat broke out on his forehead. He was glad that Eldering had asked him to hold the line at the back. If he was fighting at the front line, he would have been dead. Looking at the ruined Lioli district, the Sea King decisively chose to bring the Mute fleet home. At the same time, he thought about how he would report the battle to the Devouring Sea branch. However, when he thought about how he would be the only war chamber of commerce among the 10 war chambers of commerce, the Sea King was shocked and scared at the same time. He had been watching the battle from the sidelines, but how did he become the #1 war chamber of commerce under the underworld branch of the Devouring Sea? He recalled that the underworld headquarters recently had a batch of resources to be distributed to the underworld branch of the underworld to be distributed to the war chambers of commerce to help them grow. But now, he was the only war chamber of commerce left in the Devouring Sea branch. Awesome. After understanding his current situation, the Sea King grinned from ear to ear. He was extremely happy. What could be happier than getting stronger while lying down? The Sea King was elated. For the next few days, the forum was still discussing the battle between the demonic ape Venerable and the sword Venerable, forming 2 factions. One side said that the underworld sword Venerable would definitely win, while the other side said that the demonic ape Venerable would definitely win. Neither side could convince the other. The leader of these 2 factions was reading more than books, who had a wealth of battle history knowledge. After analyzing the rise of the underworld sword Venerable, he believed that the underworld sword Venerable would win. Many players agreed with him. On the other side was Crayon Shinchan. After analyzing the battle from all angles, he believed that the demonic ape Venerable would win. Therefore, the 2 factions started a confrontation on the forum. Soon, a large number of players from the European server joined in. After reading the analysis of the 2, they chose the side they agreed with and joined in. They also slammed the table and clamored. When faced with stubborn forum players who refused to listen to their explanations, some hot-tempered players could not help but curse their entire families. However, this kind of enthusiasm gradually subsided after a few days. The reason was very simple. No matter what the outcome was, they would not be able to see it. It was useless no matter what they said. Without seeing it with their own eyes, it was just empty talk. Moreover, they could not use their own words to convince the players from the opposing camp to agree with their views. They had to see it with their own eyes. However, soon, a new hot post appeared again. This time, the hot post appeared in all 5 major servers at the same time, causing a heated discussion and a sensation among the players of the entire battle. Battle official. Halloween server-wide carnival is about to begin. Officially releasing the event notice. The moment the players saw the event notice, they were naturally excited. This was because the appearance of the event meant that the stingy officials were finally going to bleed. Regarding the event, all the players had the same mentality. They were all prepared to perform well on that day and strive to earn a fortune from the hands of the officials. However, the players from an Araka server and the other servers had a doubt in their hearts. Why did all 5 servers start the event at the same time? Isn't Halloween our holiday? Why can't we participate in the local server's holiday and celebrate our holiday together? This is 2F** King fake. Therefore, the players from an Araka server and the other servers protested one after another, saying that the local players should not participate. They had to curb their speed of development and balance the strength of the 5 servers. Naturally, Lu Wu saw their protest. After some thought, he still posted a reply. That was the general meaning of the post. In order to show that the people of the world were one family, the sharing of holiday activities in the future would be launched at the same time across all servers, with no exceptions. At this moment, the players from the Naraka server and the other servers were filled with question marks. Stupid officials, that's not what you said in the beginning. You said that the people of the world were one family? When the local players were beating us up brutally, did they ever think about our family? Chapter 683. Event Notification. The Give You a Fright event has started. All players in the server will receive a transformation candy. Go and collect your terror points. At this moment, many of the monsters had the urge to flip the table. Detective Conan, Teletubbies, Aral, Pikachu, Luffy, Super Saiyan, event reward. Triple the arena points for every win. The monsters could not help but cover their faces when they saw the group of idiotic players. Many players had researched a lot of information and started to transform based on the things that people were afraid of. As Lu Wu released the event announcement, the players in the forum started to discuss the event intensely. The Halloween event that Lu Wu started had a huge response among the players. The content of the discussion was also very different. Basically, they were discussing how to get more coins from the stupid officials. There were also jack-o'-lanterns inside and outside the buildings. Twisted, ancient trees grew in some areas, and crows flew across the sky from time to time. The atmosphere was gloomy. The live chat channel was full of discussions. Headless Horseman restrains, Bigfoot, Abomination, Centaur, rules of the event. Each form can restrain 3 creatures of the corresponding form. Touching the restrained target will result in the death of the target. Players from the server in the same faction must work together to ensure that the number of players in the same faction is the highest before the event ends. Each map can accommodate up to 100,000 players. 20,000 players will be randomly selected from each server to participate. Introduction. After the event starts, all participating players will be teleported to the event map, Halloween Forest. They will receive a random special form. Players from the same server will form a faction and work together to eliminate players from the opposing faction. As the game notifications sounded, the event officially started. As the day of the event approached, the main cities of all the servers had a brand new look. The sunny sky instantly turned gloomy, and night fell before it was even night. It was just a game. Since it could not scare anyone, the most important thing was to have fun. The scaring event had officially started. Within a short period of time, Lu Wu's official post was pushed to the top of the hot post list on the homepage by the players. Not only was this happening in the local server, but it was also happening in other servers. Suddenly, one turned into SpongeBob SquarePants, and the other turned into Patrick Star. Hey, SpongeBob SquarePants, let's go catch a jellyfish. The players, who were already prepared, took out the transformation candy from the channel, swallowed it, and began to imagine their new forms. Zombies, mummies, headless horsemen, Bigfoot, vampires, werewolves, death gods, skeletons, Frankenstein, centaurs, ghosts, demons, medusas, abominations. Refused to give candy. Activity skill, no cooldown. Since this event was a server-wide event, there was bound to be competition. Before the event officially started, players from all the major servers were already threatening each other. Haha, I've also discovered this problem. It's not strange that I've seen so many of them. Their mental fortitude is too strong. Just now, I met a guy who set up a sinister environment in the burial grounds to scare me. I was extremely calm. If it wasn't for the fact that I can attack when I'm in a different form, I even had the impulse to turn him into experience. This was because when they tried to scare these players who had transformed into anime characters, they often couldn't help but laugh out loud. Their efforts were instantly broken. Not only did they fail to scare the players, but they also felt embarrassed. Halloween event announcement. Event 3. Monster Battle. Event duration. 20 to 2400 hours. Event reward. After this event, a Halloween event gift pack will be given based on the number of candies on the players. The more candies on the players, the higher the reward. At the same time, the first player will be chosen based on the total number of candies on each server. All the players in this server will be rewarded with an event title. 10,000 terror points. One piece of purple quality equipment above level 200. You can choose any part other than your weapon. Mischief. Activity skill, 20 minutes cooldown. Event 4. Cross-server tournament. Event duration. All day, 100 terror points. 50 soul coins. There were even more perverted players who thought from the human heart's perspective. They transformed into disgusting worms in an attempt to scare the female players. All of them had been through the baptism of blood and fire, and had seen many ferocious ghosts and monsters. The players' mental fortitude was terrifyingly strong. In the land of Beiki, there were players who raised scythes and dressed up as death gods, while others transformed into ferocious zombies. In short, there were all kinds of horrifying species. Event 2, Trick or Treat, event duration, 15 to 20 hours. However, as the event progressed, the players soon discovered a very serious problem. The existence of this group of idiotic players was like a clear stream in the event. While they were having fun in the land of Bakey, they also made the players who wanted to earn terror points feel very frustrated. Because of this, the players soon began to play tricks. Mother of asterisk cur, I turned into a worm just to find a female target. In the end, I only earned 100 terror points after going around a few rounds. You guys can't do this. Can't you just have fun? Slams the table crazily. JPG. Accompanied by the idiotic laughter, the two of them ran out of the mansion of the dead with their nets. Ask for candy. Activity skill, 20 minutes cooldown. Event 1. Give you a scare. Event duration, all day. Event reward. The winning player of the Phalanx camp will receive a Halloween gift pack. This was because they never followed the official rules when they participated in the event. They did whatever they wanted to do. 3,500 terror points. 1 month dungeon free pass, unlimited. They all said that their server was the strongest and the others were just little brothers. At this moment, they only had one goal, which was to scare all the players they encountered so that they could earn terror points in exchange for the event reward. They were all players, and it was the same event. Why did they have to show off like this? This is too much. I was fooled by a player just now. He pretended to be scared. I was quite happy at that time, but when I looked at the terror points I earned, I realized that it was only 0. He was definitely faking it. That D** Ned Mage. All kinds of cartoon characters appeared one after another, and the atmosphere of a Chinibu permeated all the servers. This made the other players gnash their teeth, but there was nothing they could do. Event note. When a player without candy is messed with, he or she will be cursed and turn into a jack-o'-lantern. A player from the same server will need to use a candy to save him or her. Event introduction. After the start of the cross-server battle, when the players enter the arena through cross-server matchmaking, an additional cross-server matchmaking mode will be activated. Each player will be given 3 cross-server matchmaking opportunities. The psychological quality of the Battle Royale players was too damn good. They realized that they could not scare their opponents at all. Their psychological quality was unbelievably strong. Ahaha! Event reward. However, it was not as simple as changing their forms to scare people. Many players had even created some special tools that could be used to scare people and started to commit crimes in the land of Bakey. 500 terror points. 1 piece of level 100 blue equipment. Random. Event introduction. During the event period, the server cross-server mode will be activated. Players can go to other servers and ask for candy from other players. At the same time, all players will have a festival candy every 10 minutes. This candy is ineatable, and when players ask for candy from other servers, they can choose to give candy or reject it. The rejected player can use the edible skill, Troublemaker, which has a 30% chance of reducing the candy on the other party by 1/3. Event introduction. During the event period, all players will be given a transformation candy. After consuming it, the player will be able to change their form according to their will, unlimited. During the event period, players will be able to use their transformation to scare other players. Whenever the target player is scared, the player will gain terror points, which will be used to exchange for event items. Since the event this time relied on earning terror points to exchange for rewards, the players would naturally consider changing their forms to be as frightening as possible. This was the only way to reap benefits from other people's fear. There were many other examples like this. During the event period, this group of idiotic players would always play tricks, so they were called the cancer of the event. All right, Patrick Starr. Many players were full of confidence in their appearance, and they felt that they would definitely receive a hefty reward for the event that day. Mummy counters, Headless Horseman, Medusa, Spectre, for example. In the Mansion of the Dead, 2 players looked at each other, then took out their transformation candy and swallowed it. In a short period of time, all sorts of monsters appeared. The surrounding players were petrified when they saw this, thinking that they might have entered the wrong game. The simplest and most effective method was to suddenly appear and scare the other party, using the element of surprise to gain terror points. This group of players would always have the same mentality. The players who initially chose to observe the situation also swallowed their transformation candy at this time. Unless they were lucky enough to meet a newbie that had just entered the game, they might be able to gain some terror points. However, the veteran players were basically the same. Not only could they not scare the other party, they could even make the other party laugh out loud. Zombie counters. Mummy, vampire, werewolf. All right, can you guys stop scaring me? Do you think I'm scared just because you turned into a ghost? I don't know how many I've killed in a day. Can you be more creative? I walked around the mansion of the dead and didn't scare a single person, nor was I scared even once. I'm about to become a Buddhist. This undoubtedly made many players who were ready for a big fight extremely depressed. They felt that the opponents were too strong and too difficult to deal with. Can't they just carry on with the event? This is too much. To the previous poster, I also met a primary school student and tried to scare him, but he waved his hand at me in disdain, telling me that it's enough. I was confused and a little autistic at that time. I've been thinking about this for a long time. I thought that I could become the trump card of this event, Cho-Cho wailing. JPG. The more advanced version was to find an environment, set it up, and then wait for the target player to fall into the trap. Then, they would scare the target player. The random transformation was as follows: 32 types, 1,500 terror points. 1 level, 160 blue quality equipment. Random. As the event progressed, most players encountered this problem. Then, in addition to the monsters in the land of Beiki, there was also the aura of an idiot. This was exactly what Lu Wu wanted to see, because it would be more fun. I met a primary school student, he was scared by me, and I actually got 200 terror points. Awesome. I think I found a way to get rich, laughing emoji. Chapter 684. While the first wave of activities was still going on, the appearance of some idiotic players changed the atmosphere of the activities. This group of players carried out the activities with the attitude that everything was fine as long as they were happy. It even destroyed the originally gloomy and terrifying atmosphere, causing the idiotic atmosphere to spread across all the major servers. At this moment, the players who were doing the activities gritted their teeth in anger. Most of them did not get much terror points until the end of the activities. Therefore, this group of players could only choose to hold a grudge. They would remember the names of these poisonous players. When they meet outside the main city in the future, they would know what pain was, and they would be happy. As the first activity ended, the second activity began. Trick or treat. This second wave of activities was a server-wide activity. Several teleportation portals appeared in the main city of every server, allowing players to go to other servers to cause trouble. For this wave of activities, the players of all the servers were already prepared. Although they did not discuss it in advance, it was as if it was premeditated. A large number of players from all 4 servers landed in Beiki at the same time. This time, they all chose the original server as their target. The players who had yet to use the teleportation portal to go to other servers immediately became the targets of these players. Before the first candy in their hands could even warm up, it would be snatched by players from other servers. While they were asking for candy, the players of the 4 major servers even tried to attack the NPCs in the Mansion of the Dead. At this moment, they triggered a hidden reward. They were pleasantly surprised to find that every time they asked for a reward from an NPC, they would receive a return of 1 to 100 soul coins. Of course, it could also be a notification that the request was invalid. Therefore, the ladies of the Wood Spirit clan had a mental breakdown. After all, they had too many assets. Now that they were being targeted by the wolves, they would be finished. Without the slightest hesitation, under the leadership of the Wood Spirit clan's leader, the entire Wood Spirit clan crossed the teleportation portal and prepared to go sightseeing in other servers for a while. Otherwise, they were afraid that they would be robbed by this group of locusts. We can't afford to offend them. Let's go. Regarding this, the original server players were also gnashing their teeth in hatred. However, the rules were fair and just. They were usually too domineering, so there was nothing they could do now that they were targeted. However, they remembered this grudge and would definitely take revenge in the future. On the other hand, the players from other servers felt refreshed, feeling that they had finally won. And at this stage, the idiotic players also played their own tricks. After learning that they could ask for candy from an NPC, this group of idiotic players formed a group. They surrounded an NPC and demanded all kinds of candy. Moreover, all of them wore arrogant expressions as if they were asking for a debt. The captured NPCs knew what cruelty was, and they understood what it meant to return to freedom overnight. Many of the NPCs felt like crying. It wasn't easy to make money. Not only were we being exploited by the bosses behind the scenes, but the players were also exploiting us. Of course, there were NPCs who weren't afraid. This was just like Tongwa. Many NPCs had fled, but he was still calmly strolling around the mansion of the dead in his little avatar. His mentality was much more stable. You guys can have whatever you want. I'll admit defeat if I can get any soul coins. After all, his assets were in the negative, and he still owed a lot of debts. It was impossible to get soul coins from him. The shameless Tong Gua even took the initiative to ask for candy from the players. With the mentality of giving it a try, he didn't expect to really get a lot of candies. At this moment, Tong Gua knew that asking for candy was mutual and that NPCs also had human rights. Hence, he became even more arrogant and chased after the cross-server players in the Mansion of the Dead to exploit them. Come on, let's hurt each other. Whoever is a coward is a coward. Tong Gua skillfully demonstrated the saying, "The barefooted are not afraid of the barefooted," and let the players who thought they could get a fortune from the NPCs know that poverty is power. Besides that, Yanmai from the Phantom Fish Clan also followed Tong Gua to cause trouble in the Mansion of the Dead. The entire server was supported by the two poor guys, Tong Gua and Yanmai. As for the other NPCs, they were either hiding or taking refuge in other servers. The moment the event ended, the game notification appeared, and the ranking of the total number of candies in each server was revealed. Ranking of the most candies in each server for Halloween. First place, Demonic Spine Region 2nd place, Naraka Region 3rd place, Land of Tsangshu 4th place, Xianfeng Tribe, Region 5th place, Land of Beiki. The original server players were very upset that they didn't get the first place, but they couldn't do anything about it. They had always been in the first place, and they were used to it. They didn't expect to be targeted by others in this event, and they suffered a setback. However, the original server players knew very well that they would get their revenge. Soon, the third event was launched, the Battle of Demons. Along with the notification of the start of the event, the players decisively opened the event panel and clicked on the matching button. Suddenly, white lights flashed continuously in the 5 servers, and every 20,000 players were paired with 80,000 players from other servers. Then, they were transported into the Halloween forest, and the role-playing competition began. Under the bright moonlight, the silent forest was suddenly filled with a large number of evil creatures, including werewolves, vampires, zombies, and so on. The competition began again. This time, the players from other servers could no longer target the original server because they could only distinguish between friend and foe, but they couldn't tell which server they were from. This undoubtedly made many players from other servers unhappy. It was rare for them to have a chance to suppress the original server, so they wanted to suppress the original server to the last place and never let them make a comeback. Therefore, they tried to communicate with each other, planning to kill all the original server players first and then compete for the top 4 positions. However, how could the original server players let them do as they wished? Therefore, whenever 2 teams of players met, such a scene would occur. "Brother, which server are you from? We're on the same side. We're not from the original server." In short, regardless of whether they were from the original server or not, the original server players would say that they were not from the original server when they answered. Of course, there were times when things got out of hand. When asked which server they were from, the original server players would reply that they were from the European server. However, the other party just so happened to be from the European server, and they saw through it on the spot, so a fight was inevitable. Of course, a fight was also very strategic, and at the same time, luck was also very important. If they were unlucky and encountered a small team of players, they might all have the type of monsters that counter their own side. At that time, other than running away, there was only death waiting for them if they fought head-on. The entire event map was filled with scheming and plotting. Apart from Voldemort, only players with outstanding intelligence could survive until the end. The teams they led were always able to create an advantage for their respective camps, and eventually led their camps to victory. This group of highly intelligent players would calculate the number of players in the map in the camp's live chat channel, and the number of players of different types, and then plan the subsequent confrontation based on that. When luck could not determine success or failure, strategy would become the key to success in this event. For example, in the battle of one of the maps, Yin Xiaoqi led the camp, and the entire battle situation was under her control. After calculating the total number of monsters at the current stage, she led a group of players who chose to choose Zombies Hide, and then let the other players fight outside. Step by step, there are almost only 4 types of monsters left on the map: zombies, mummies, vampires, and werewolves. At this time, Yin Xiaoqi let the players who randomly turned into zombies enter the arena. Under the restraining effect, the other 3 types of monsters could not kill zombies at all, and in terms of the rules, they were completely restrained. This was like Tianji's horse race, but there were more variables in the rules. Although the number of monsters at the current stage could be seen in the upper right corner, it was definitely an extremely difficult thing to control. In the final stage, even though the other party far outnumbered them, Yin Xiaoqi still won the competition. This wave of event was very exciting for the players. In the absence of a command, how to avoid monsters that countered them, and at the same time, how to hunt and kill enemy players that countered them was full of uncertainty. No one knew what type of monster they would encounter next. When the event-ending notification sounded, the event was also coming to an end. However, at this time, the entire Battle League was in an uproar. The cross-server arena was a part of every event at this stage. Many players would try to compete with other players with different growth systems at this time. However, in this aspect, the original server had a great advantage. It could be said that the original players dominated half of the cross-server arena. Even if the other server players did not want to admit this, they had to face it. Since it was an all-day event, many players were immersed in other activities, and after finishing their 3 cross-server matches, they would not pay attention to the situation in the cross-server arena. However, it was different this time, because there was a pinnacle battle. At this time, in room 52325 of the cross-server arena, the number of spectators was increasing exponentially. As the arena map loaded successfully, the spectating players appeared in an area similar to the ancient Roman Colosseum, and they were in the audience seats. Below them, the silhouettes of 2 players appeared. One of them was Ao Jian, who represented the top combat strength of the original server, and the other was the Asia server's recognized #1 powerhouse, Northstar Oneblade. The players were excited when they found out that the battle between the 2 was about to begin. The forum would often discuss who was stronger between the 2 of them. However, without a real battle, the players from the Asia server and the original server thought that the swordsman on their side was stronger, and they could not convince the other party. However, this time, it was a face-to-face battle. Especially the players from the original server and the Asia server, they were overwhelmed with emotions, eager to know who would obtain the title of the #1 swordsman. As the number of spectators increased crazily, the playing system of the audience seats was activated. Otherwise, the entire arena's audience seats would not be able to accommodate such a large number of players. The countless audience seats were connected to the main arena's plane, ensuring that all the spectators felt as if they were in the arena, as if the 2 people were right in front of them. As the game notification sounded, the barrier in the middle of the arena disappeared. At this moment, the spectating players held their breath. However, what the players did not expect was that neither Ao Jian nor Northstar Oneblade made the first move. Instead, they looked at each other. At this moment, Northstar Oneblade spoke first. "I've seen many of your battle videos. You're very strong, and you're a master of the sword." Ao Jian smiled faintly. "I've also seen your battle videos. Your swordsmanship is very domineering. I've been looking forward to a battle with you, and now it's finally here. However, before the battle, can you answer a question in my mind?" Northstar Oneblade suddenly asked. Ao Jian was stunned, but he still nodded. "Your swordsmanship is very pure. How'd you do it?" When North Star One Blade first entered the Battle League, he watched many of Ao Jian's battle videos on the forum and realized that his sword was not mixed with any external force. It was too pure, and it was a little unbelievable. This was also something that North Star One Blade had always been puzzled about. Now that he saw Ao Jian, he naturally wanted to ask about it. Because I don't have feelings, crossed out. For the sake of the sword, I've given up many things, including my true love. At this point, Ao Jian's face showed a hint of indifference, but his heart ached slightly. You can even give up your lover? I'm afraid your swordsmanship has gone astray. North Star One Blade shook his head and said. He walked on the path of the emotion sword, which deepened his swordsmanship. From the moment he started practicing swordsmanship, his swordsmanship had condensed into feelings. Love, hatred, familial love, and so on. These were the key to the growth of his swordsmanship. To be able to reach this stage, North Star One Blade felt that feelings were indispensable. In his opinion, feelings were far greater than the sword in his hand. Therefore, North Star One Blade felt that Ao Jian's path of the emotionless sword had gone astray. Hearing this, Ao Jian's mouth twitched. However, he still said with a cold expression, "Women will only affect the speed of my sword." Hearing this, North Star One Blade subconsciously looked at his right arm, the platycodon, and then a strange expression appeared on his face. He suddenly realized that although they both used swords, they did not seem to have a common language. At this time, in the audience seats, a woman suddenly stood up and pulled out her machete. F***, Ao Jian, you bastard. Women affect the speed of your sword? If you have the guts, say it to my face. See if I don't chop off your *SS. Dear mother, don't be agitated, don't be agitated. Seeing this, Mo Xiaoxin hurriedly pulled back Mo Lanlan, who was agitated and wanted to jump into the arena to chop people. At this moment, Mo Xiaoxin could not help but curse in his heart. However, he was also extremely helpless towards this father of his who had no feelings for him. You said you want to compete, so let's compete. Why are you acting tough? Chapter 685. They both used swords, but after a short exchange, both of them realized that they were not the same kind of people. Ao Jian was the kind of person who was obsessed with swords. His feelings for swords ran through his entire life. Swords used to be his everything. North Star Blade was the complete opposite. He wielded his sword for love, using it to protect, to take revenge, to fulfill promises, and so on. The sword was more like a tool for him to achieve his goals. His sword was condensed with emotions. But most of the time, his strength was not enough for him to put it into action. Therefore, his sword grew stronger as his emotions changed. Although both of them valued the swords in their hands, the inner meaning was completely different. At the end of the conversation, both of them stood still. As Ao Jian waved his hand, the 9 spiritual sword behind him floated up and lined up in front of him. Come on, let me see if your swordsmanship is stronger or mine. North Star Blade nodded and reached out his left hand to grab his right arm. His right arm fell off by itself and turned into a 5-foot-long tachi in a flash. The battle was about to begin. At this moment, the onlookers were extremely excited. Some meddlesome players even opened bets on the forum and gave out odds, ready to earn some soul coins. Of course, such players would be banned by Lu Wu for 3 days on the grounds that online gambling was prohibited. The players have been looking forward to this battle for a long time. Not only the players from the original server and the Asia server, but players from other servers also came after hearing the news. They all wanted to see who was stronger between Ao Jian and North Star Blade in this pinnacle level battle. The number of spectators reached an unprecedented high in a short period of time. Amidst the anticipation of the players, North Star Blade, who was standing at the side of the arena, made the first move. He moved his right foot forward and slashed forward with his tachi. In an instant, a crimson sword appeared in front of North Star Blade and swept toward Ao Jian. Seeing this, Ao Jian's expression turned solemn. He did not dare to be careless against North Star Blade. His fingers moved forward, and suddenly the 9 spiritual swords rotated rapidly and lined up in a sword formation, shattering the incoming sword while on the spot. At this moment, Northstar Blade moved. He suddenly took 3 steps forward and turned his left wrist. 3 streaks of sword will condensed and swept toward Ao Jian from the front. Ao Jian looked calm. He separated 3 spiritual swords to meet the red sword will, while the other 6 spiritual swords spread out and stabbed Bei Chun from both sides. Northstar One Blade didn't stop in the slightest. Letting out an enraged roar, he raised his katana high into the air and slashed it out in front of him. Taiyuan's swordsmanship. Fall! The platycodon turned black at this moment, and the pitch-black flames climbed up from the sword hilt, igniting the sword body. Boom! The raging flame attacked forward, repelling the 3 spiritual swords in front of Ao Jian. The 6 spiritual swords on the left and right sides were entangled in the air by the black flame and could not escape for a while. Northstar Blade immediately seized the opportunity. He crouched down and passed between the 3 swords on his left and right, heading straight for Proud Sword. The Tai Dao burning with black flames suddenly fell at this moment. The surging sword intent condensed on the sword body, releasing a dazzling light. Ao Jian was shocked and immediately controlled the 3 spiritual swords in front of him to line up in a sword formation. Boom! Under the attack, the 3 spiritual swords trembled violently and made a buzzing sound. Ao Jian, who was behind them, was pushed several meters away by the violent sword intent. What a strong talent in swordsmanship! What a strong sword intent! Facing Northstar One Blade for the first time, Ao Jian found that he had completely underestimated the strength of Northstar One Blade. That was the truth. Although Ao Jian's sword intent was pure, his talent in swordsmanship was far inferior to Northstar One Blade, who was recognized as the most talented swordsman in the history of J Country. Northstar One Blade's name was a legend in J Country's circle, and he represented a legend. He was an absolute powerhouse who broke through the catastrophe of life and death during the age of Dharma ending and comprehended the spiritual sword technique. Under this attack, the violent sword intent formed out of thin air and kept condensing, crazily attacking Ao Jian's nerves. Ao Jian suspected that if he had not suppressed Northstar One Blade in terms of level and attributes, he would not have been able to deal with such an attack calmly. He would have to pay a price. The sword intent that formed out of thin air rushed towards him. At this moment, Ao Jian made a sword gesture with one hand and stretched his hand forward. The 9 spiritual swords that shared the same thought suddenly turned back and arranged themselves in a fan shape behind him. Then, Ao Jian stabbed the tachi that was coming towards him with one finger. His finger and the tachi collided at this moment. At this moment, Ao Jian no longer held back and released one of his strongest moves, the 10th sword. And the 10th sword was himself. With the support of the 9 spiritual swords behind him, the sword intent condensed by this finger was far stronger than before. It was as if his entire body had transformed into a sharp sword that showed off its ability. Boom! In the midst of the sword chi, the 2 forces pressed against each other at the point of collision, forming 2 circular barriers that offset each other. At this moment, the bricks on the ground of the arena were shattered and flew to both sides. The sword intent of the 2 began to strengthen in the stalemate. At this moment, the 2 began to compete in the sword intent. Seeing this scene, the surrounding players exclaimed in satisfaction. They were not even willing to blink their eyes. This was more immersive than those special effects films. At this moment, the players from the original server and the Asia server were crazily spamming the live chat channel of the spectator seats, cheering for their own players. At this moment, the 9 spiritual swords behind Ao Jian trembled, and he took a step forward. The soaring sword intent emerged and slowly condensed a giant colorful sword behind him. Northstar Blade slowly slid backwards under the pressure of the attack. Seeing this scene, the players from the original server began to cheer. Awesome, my Ao Jian is indeed the best in the world of Sword Dao 666, the Battle of Special Effects. The funds are burning. This is too exciting. In comparison, the special effects of my skills are nothing. Too wild. No wonder he is a powerhouse in the Ghost King realm. His battle is so gorgeous and cool. It gives me the motivation to become stronger. At this moment, the situation gradually tilted towards Ao Jian's side. As the giant sword behind Ao Jian gradually condensed, the sword intent continued to strengthen. At this time, the index finger of his right hand also bloomed with colorful streamers. Roar! At the moment when the giant sword was completely condensed, Ao Jian let out a low roar. Then, he suddenly retracted his right hand. When his index finger pointed forward again, the giant sword behind him also stabbed forward. Boom! The wind howled, and the giant sword suddenly hit Kikyo. Under the blow, North Star Sword was sent flying, and his body was thrown into the air. The giant sword below also followed Ao Jian's direction and flew towards North Star Sword in the sky. Seeing this scene, the players from the original server cheered, knowing that the battle was about to end. On the other hand, the players from the Asia server could not help but sigh, feeling that they had lost to the Mother of King original server again. However, at this time, an unexpected scene appeared. North Star Sword slowly dragged his Tachi in the air. The speed was very slow, but it dragged out countless afterimages. At the moment when the Tachi was raised horizontally in front of him, he whispered, "Kikyo, come with me." The Kikyo sword trembled at this time, as if it was responding to North Star Sword. Countless lines appeared on its surface, and the flame that was extinguished by Ao Jian's sword intent was ignited again. Taiyuan swordsmanship, sacrifice. As North Star Sword murmured, his eyes became extremely determined, and his Tachi suddenly slashed towards the giant sword below. The black flame that was formed by the sword aura that filled the sky gathered and climbed onto the blade of the sword. Along with North Star Sword's slash from top to bottom, it transformed into a crescent-shaped flaming sword aura. At the moment when the sword fell, Ao Jian's face showed an expression of disbelief. This was because he realized that the sword intent inside the giant sword was being drawn out and continuously surged towards the flaming sword aura, becoming a part of it. In the confrontation between the two forces, one's loss and the other's gain, the disadvantage turned into an advantage in the blink of an eye. When the flaming sword aura broke through the shadow of the giant sword and smashed it into specks of starlight, Ao Jian could not help but be stunned. Not only was Ao Jian stunned, but even the players who were watching the battle were dumbfounded. They had all heard of North Star Sword's name. He was recognized as the #1 expert in the Asia server and had never been surpassed by any other player in the Asia server. On the other hand, Ao Jian was one of the strongest cheaters in the original server. Even so, in reality, the players were more inclined to believe that Ao Jian would win. This was because Ao Jian was almost an undefeated legend in the eyes of many people. At least in the battles, he had challenged many experts and had never been defeated. Moreover, his battle record of consecutive victories in the 1524 arena was even more proof of Ao Jian's terrifying combat strength. Although the Asia server players were saying tough words, deep down in their hearts, they were actually helpless and felt that North Star Sword would be defeated in this battle. Many Asia server players grew up watching Ao Jian's videos, so they were very familiar with Ao Jian's combat strength. In the eyes of many Asia server players, it was almost impossible for him to be defeated. However, this time, North Star Sword's slash shattered the impossible. At the moment when the flaming sword aura smashed the giant sword, it seemed to symbolize the destruction of a legend. The players who were watching the battle subconsciously held their breath. Impossible. At this time, Ao Jian's face was ferocious as he condensed all the sword intent in his body and pointed his right index finger. At the moment when it collided with the flaming sword aura, Ao Jian's figure was engulfed by the flames. The sword intent was gradually weakened in the offset. Eventually, he could not hold on any longer and fell to the ground with a loud bang. He began to pant heavily. At this time, North Star Sword landed on the ground and waved his hand to disperse the sword aura. However, he did not attack again. Instead, he pressed the Kikyu on his right shoulder and turned it into his right arm. I lost, Ao Jian said with a pained expression. Looking at Ao Jian, who was a little lost, North Star Sword could not help but sigh, but he did not know how to persuade him. Sometimes the competition between swordsmen was so cruel. It was a competition between their sword hearts and sword intent. The defeat of one party would often cause the other party's sword heart to waver. I've been pursuing swordsmanship all my life. Even if I condensed such a pure sword intent, I'm still not as good as you. At this moment, Ao Jian closed his eyes and felt a stabbing pain in his heart. Hearing this, North Star Sword shook his head. You're wrong. Your sword intent is actually stronger than mine, but you haven't achieved true purity. I found that your sword intent has been mixed with other things and has lost its original realm. If your sword intent could really be as pure as it used to be, the person who would be defeated today would definitely be me. When saying this, North Star Sword's expression was solemn. This was not him speaking blindly, but he had discovered Ao Jian's weakness during the battle. If it was a pure sword intent, its lethality would inevitably increase by several levels, and it would not be used by his own sword intent. When watching Ao Jian's battle video, North Star Sword studied Ao Jian's sword intent and found that this person's sword intent was very pure, and its lethality was more than a level higher than his own sword intent. This was also the reason why he asked Ao Jian why he could have such a pure sword intent before the battle. However, this time, North Star Sword found that Ao Jian's sword intent was not as pure as it used to be. It had obviously changed, and it was mixed with other things. This was undoubtedly Ao Jian's biggest flaw, and it was also something that North Star Sword did not expect. In fact, although North Star Sword did his best in this battle, it was more for the sake of learning and learning. He did not think that he could beat Ao Jian. At most, it would be 3-7, with him having 30% and Ao Jian having 70%. Upon hearing this, Ao Jian was stunned. Have I changed? At this moment, he suddenly thought of two people. It was also the appearance of these two fetters that disturbed his firm Taoist heart. One was Mo Xiaoxin, and the other was Mo Longlon. He thought that he was alone in the world, and he had no other pursuits other than the way of the sword. However, their appearance shook his rock-solid pursuit of the way of the sword, giving rise to many emotions in his heart. At this moment, Ao Jian's expression became complicated. In the audience seats, Mo Xiaoxin's eyes widened at this moment. He naturally heard the conversation between Ao Jian and North Star Sword. At this moment, he panicked and could not help but look at his mother, Mo Longlon, and asked in a low voice, "Mother, do you think father will kill us in order to recast a pure sword intent? If so, his pursuit of the way of the sword will become smooth again." Hearing this, Mo Longlon slapped the back of Mo Xiaoxin's head. As if she was not satisfied, she slapped him twice in a row. "Who are you calling father? Who is your father? I picked you up, and you don't have a father." Mo Xiaoxin wanted to cry, but no tears came out. He quickly said, "I don't have a father. I don't have a father. I only have my most beloved mother." Hearing this, Mo Longlon glared at him and did not answer Mo Xiaoxin's question. Instead, she looked at Ao Jian in the arena with a murderous look in her eyes, causing Mo Xiaoxin to tremble. This family is so hard to live in. Not only is his mother extremely cruel, but his father also pursues the ultimate pure way of the sword. Who knows? He might kill his wife and son to prove his way. Damn it, it's a miracle that I'm still alive. It's so hard for me. At this moment, in the arena, North Star Sword looked at Ao Jian, who was struggling. He could not help but sigh, and then said, "We are all human beings, and emotional fetters are inevitable. Since we can't get rid of them, why should we try to erase them? They are not burdens, but strength. These feelings that are hard to let go might make you stronger. You should try to accept them, not resist them." Hearing this, Ao Jian was shocked. He slowly raised his head to look at North Star Sword and said, "Emotion sword? That's right. My sword intent comes from my emotions. I've never regarded it as a burden. On the contrary, it has always given me endless power. Although the pure sword intent is strong enough, when you reach the end of this path, you will completely lose your emotions and become a puppet controlled by the sword intent. This is not the path we should take. At that time, you will no longer be you, no matter how strong you are. North Star Sword's words were like a blow to the head, shattering the stubbornness in Ao Jian's heart. At this moment, Ao Jian thought of the grief and helplessness he felt when he lost the love of his life. The pure sword will give him great strength, but it also cost him a lot. Since it was so difficult to let go of those regretful things, why should he resist them? Since there was a chance to start over, he should firmly grasp it and not let it leave him. Crack! At this moment, Ao Jian's pure sword heart was broken. At the same time, a smile appeared on his face. Ao Jian smiled as if he had been reborn. No matter how many opponents he had defeated before, he had never smiled. However, this failure made him smile. Seeing this scene, North Star Sword also smiled. Congratulations, you've comprehended it. At this moment, North Star Sword sensed a vigorous new sword will growing in Ao Jian's body. Although it was not as pure as before, it was full of vitality and vitality. Thank you. Ao Jian looked at North Star Sword sincerely and thanked him. You're welcome. I hope you can become stronger and return to your peak. I look forward to fighting you again. North Star Sword said with a smile. I will. I will definitely defeat you. Ao Jian nodded solemnly. All right, it's a deal. At this moment, Ao Jian's figure slowly faded out of the arena, choosing to admit defeat. In this cross-server tournament, the two parties are Beiki player Ao Jian and Devil Spine player North Star Sword. The winner is North Star Sword, and he has obtained tournament points. When the game notification sounded, the audience was in an uproar. The Asia server players were howling crazily. The top player of their server had defeated Ao Jian from the original server. This was definitely a legendary moment for them, worthy of being recorded in the server's history. The feeling of ending a legend could only be described as exhilarating. On the other hand, the original players seemed to be in a daze. They could not believe that Ao Jian would lose to North Star Sword. This was really unbelievable to them. Ao Jian had always been so strong and was always regarded as one of the top 3 players in the entire server. But now, he actually lost. At the same time, the players from the Naraka server, Africa server, and the European server were also ignited with passion. This battle made them realize that the legend was not unbreakable. Even the latecomers could break through the legend and stand at the peak. North Star Sword's victory gave the players from the other 4 main servers, who had always been suppressed by the original server, endless fighting spirit. At this moment, a concept was deeply rooted in the hearts of the players. Even the original server's cheat was not invincible. As long as one worked hard, everyone had a chance. When the screen of the arena faded, the players returned to the game. However, the popularity of this battle did not stop. The players were discussing it in the forum. Many professional players began to explain the battle and even provided data support to analyze the key reasons for the victory and defeat of this battle. It could be said that the players in the entire server were shocked by this battle. After exiting the arena, Mo Xiaoxin was still in a daze. At this time, his friend list suddenly changed. Mo Xiaoxin subconsciously clicked on it. Ao Jian, are you there? Seeing that it was a message from Ao Jian, Mo Xiaoxin shrank his neck, feeling frightened. Mom, dearest, Ao Jian seems to be attacking us. What should we do? Hearing this, Mo Lanlan slowly pulled out her machete and said with a cold expression, Kill. After the battle with Ao Jian, North Star Sword also returned to the main city, Blazing Sky City. He was greeted by the blessings and cheers of Awami and other guild members. The whole Blazing Sky City was as lively as a festival. Helpless, North Star Sword could only brace himself to deal with them before he escaped. After a short rest, North Star Sword clicked on the activity menu again. Looking at the number of cross-server battles he had left, he clicked on the match button with anticipation. About 5 seconds later, a game notification appeared. Frowny face game notification. Match successful. Your opponent is the Beiki player, who he Please prepare for battle. Chapter 686. After a short rest, Northstar Blade opened the arena's interface once more, filled with anticipation. In his heart, he thought that after winning this cross-server battle, he would use the arena points to buy a purple-quality longsword for Ikizumi in the shop that she had always wanted. However, when he saw the name of his opponent, Northstar Blade was dumbfounded. How could he be so lucky? Previously, it was Aogn. This time, he actually encountered the infamous Great Demon King. At this moment, Northstar Blade was speechless. He felt that he should try his luck the next time Battle League had a lucky draw. Who knows, he might get rich overnight. After all, his luck was too good. As the surroundings changed, Northstar Blade sighed, his eyes gradually becoming determined. He had to win this battle. Many of the players who were paying attention to the cross-server arena would occasionally discover the names of Northstar Blade and who he in the newly refreshed list of opponents. Their expressions would become very interesting. The excitement of the battle between Northstar Blade and Aogn had yet to die down, but they did not expect such a good show to happen. Some players immediately informed their friends about the news. Then, news about the battle between the two appeared on the forum. Many players heard the news and quickly rushed over. Room 259271 in the arena was instantly filled to the brim, and the spectator seats began to refresh. The number of spectators skyrocketed. This time, the arena's random location was on an isolated island. Under the warm sunshine, a gentle breeze blew, and the cries of seagulls accompanied by the sound of waves crashing on the beach made everything seem peaceful and beautiful. At this moment, Hu-He and Northstar Blade's figures appeared on the beach. At the same time, the defense barrier that separated the two also appeared. The moment he saw his opponent, Hu-He also had a strange expression. He participated in the cross-server battle because there were 3 cross-server battles in this event. As long as he won, he would receive a high amount of arena points as a reward. He had never thought that he would encounter a wall-level opponent. He had seen the battle between Aogn and Northstar Blade, so he was a little surprised to see Northstar Blade. Looking at Northstar Blade's grave expression, Hu-He awkwardly greeted him. "Hello, hello." Northstar Blade immediately replied. Then, both of them fell into silence. Hu did not know much about Northstar Blade. He had only heard that he was the strongest person in the Asia server. His deepest impression of Northstar Blade was his battle with Aogn just now. What Hu did not expect was that Aogn would lose to this person. Although the high-level arena had a relatively balanced system, Aogn had always been one of the top powerhouses in Hui's eyes. Therefore, Aogn's loss was beyond his expectations. At that moment, Hui did not know what had happened to Aogn, nor did he know that Aogn had lost because his heart of the sword was shaken and his sword was no longer as pure as before. He still thought that Northstar Blade really had that kind of strength. As for Northstar Blade, Hui's name was like a thunderclap piercing his ears. The number 1 person in the forum was the contrarian Crayon Shinchan, while the most famous player in the game was none other than the Great Demon King. Hui, Crayon Shinchan ruled the forum, bringing misery and suffering to the forum players. On the other hand, Hui's achievements were equally glorious. He had once single-handedly brought devastating natural disasters to 2 large regions. He had even caused the strongest players of the 5 major servers to be dominated by the natural disasters for a period of time. It was an appalling sight to behold. To be able to make the players of the original server suffer was an achievement that the players of the other 4 major servers had never achieved. Therefore, when he saw Hu-He, Northstar Blade felt extremely helpless. He had encountered the cheaters of the original server one after another, and this one seemed to be even more terrifying than Aogn. How bitter. However, Northstar Blade did not have the slightest intention of giving up in this battle. He was prepared to fight with all his might. Moreover, the players were even more excited about this battle, and some people even started voting for it. Great Demon King versus Northstar Blade. Who do you think will win? A. Great Demon King B. Northstar Blade. Players participated in such an interesting voting activity. In a short period of time, tens of millions of votes were cast. The support rate was as follows. Support Great Demon King winning, 94, 8%. Support North Star Blade winning, 5, 2%. It could be said to be a one-sided voting result. Although North Star Blade defeated AOGN and achieved a remarkable achievement, and was even called a legend by the players of the Asia server after the battle, the players of the 5 major servers generally favored the Great Demon King for this battle. Many players of the Asia server even voted for the Great Demon King. Players who knew the Great Demon King clearly knew that the Great Demon King looked weak and powerless, but in reality, he was weak and powerless. However, he had many experts under him. There were 2 zombie spirits of the Ghost Emperor realm, dozens of Ghost King realm, and countless Ghost generals. If one fought against Huhi, one would have to be able to restrain them and kill them with one blow. Otherwise, one would have to face an army of zombie spirits. No matter how strong one's head was, one would not be able to withstand it. On the other hand, North Star Blade only had the combat power of a beginner Ghost King. If one did not consider his attainments in swordsmanship and battle techniques, he might not even be as strong as one of the Ghost Kings under Huhi's control. They were simply not on the same level. Therefore, the players generally favored the Great Demon King, Huhi. Ha ha ha, bastards of the Asia server, continue to be arrogant. This time, the Great Demon King will teach you a lesson. Open your eyes wide and watch. My depressed mood has turned for the better. Ha ha ha. I've met the Great Demon King. It's time to slap him in the face. I'm so excited. Don't be so arrogant. What if North Star Blade is hiding his strength? It's hard to say who will win. Don't get slapped in the face. Come. Place your bets on North Star Blade. The odds are 1-5. This is your chance to make money. Place your bets quickly. Game notification. You have been muted for 3 days. Although North Star Blade is indeed strong, his chances of winning against the Great Demon King are slim. If North Star Blade can win this round, he'll really become a god. While the players of the various servers were discussing, the barrier in the middle of the arena slowly dissipated. The battle had officially begun. Let's begin. North Star Blade nodded slightly at Huhi, then slapped his right arm. Instantly, the Platycodon transformed into a 5-foot-long Tachi that slid into his hand. Seeing this, Huhi smiled and patted the corpse soul bag. Along with the appearance of wisps of mist, dozens of zombie spirits appeared in front of Huhi in an instant. North Star Blade was speechless. Feeling the murderous aura from the dozens of zombie spirits in front of him, North Star Blade felt sad. This wasn't a one-on-one fight, it was a group fight. Coming. North Star Blade let out a soft yell and dashed toward Huhi. North Star One Blade knew very well that if he were to fight the zombie spirits head-on, he would definitely lose. There was only one way to win, and that was to kill Huhi, who was controlling the zombie spirits, and end the battle immediately. Seeing North Star Blade dashing toward him, Huhi did not panic at all. With a thought, the 8 zombie spirits in the Ghost King realm at the front immediately moved. A pit suddenly appeared on the ground under the 8 zombie spirits' feet, and their figures suddenly disappeared on the spot. When they reappeared, they were in front of North Star Blade. Seeing this, North Star Blade's expression turned solemn. He immediately raised his Platycodon and slashed at him. Sword will condensed on the sword, forming a violent sword chi. It advanced with an indomitable momentum. Seeing this, Hui's expression remained the same. He took out the bronze bell and shook it gently. Suddenly, the 8 attacking zombie spirits emitted a thick corpse chi, and their speed increased. Boom! The 8 zombie spirits attacked at the same time, colliding with North Star Blade's soaring sword chi. At this moment, North Star Blade was sent flying. He staggered a few steps before stabilizing himself. However, he did not hesitate. His figure shot out like a sharp sword again, trying to bypass the zombie spirits from the side. Although the zombie spirits were strong, in North Star Blade's opinion, they were manipulated objects after all. Their agility could not compare to his. However, these zombie spirits were extremely fast. They once again blocked North Star Blade's path and formed a human wall. At the same time, they attacked and repelled him again. After suffering another setback, North Star Blade's fighting spirit was ignited. The Platycodon sword suddenly ignited with sword will flame, and he charged forward again. Taiyuan's swordsmanship. Renounce! With a furious roar, the flaming sword chi appeared. The crescent-shaped flaming sword chi engulfed a zombie king in the Ghost King realm in an instant. Under the impact of the violent sword will, cracks appeared on the zombie king's hard body, and a fiery red sword light could be seen faintly from within. Accompanied by a loud bang, the zombie king's body suddenly shattered. Northstar Blade immediately seized the opportunity. His figure passed through, heading straight for who was surrounded by the zombie horde. At this moment, the remaining 7 zombie spirits suddenly turned around and attacked him. Northstar Blade changed his footwork and immediately chose to dodge. Although his reaction was very timely, one of the zombie spirits still managed to hit Northstar Blade's back with a palm. This attack took away 1/10 of Northstar Blade's HP and even messed up his advance. At this moment, Northstar Blade stabbed the Platycodon into the ground. He used the momentum to spin 3 times in the air before landing steadily. Then he squatted down and shot out like a sharp sword. The tip of his sword pointed straight at Hu-He. Seeing this, Hu-He was a little surprised, but he still shook the bell decisively. Immediately, dozens of zombie clan members in front of Hu-He attacked at the same time, pouncing on Northstar Blade. Northstar Blade unleashed all of his power against the encirclement of the corpse spirits. His sword will burst forth with infinite power in his body, reaching the realm of being one with the sword. His advancing speed increased by more than 3 times. Relying on extremely precise dodging, Northstar Blade actually managed to evade the siege of dozens of zombie spirits, bypassing the seemingly unbreakable defensive barrier in a short period of time. Although he was hit a few times along the way and his HP was dangerously low, the corner of Northstar Blade's mouth curved into a smile. The spectating players were also dumbfounded by this scene. Northstar Blade's footwork and dodging were textbook. Northstar Blade's miraculous movement technique made them feel as if they were playing a different game than Northstar Blade. For a short period of time, the live chat channel of the arena was dead silent. The players were all in shock. When they saw Northstar Blade running towards the defenseless Hu-He, the spectating players' hearts trembled. Were they really going to witness the birth of a legend? When Northstar Blade was only 3 meters away from Hu-He's expression remained the same. He even revealed an enigmatic smile. Then, he crouched down and slammed his palm on the ground. Corpse burial coffin seal. Following Hu-He's shout, countless twisted black veins appeared on the ground with his palm as the center, spreading out rapidly like a spider web. At that moment, the zombie spirits behind Northstar Blade exploded one after another, turning into a black mist that flew towards Northstar Blade and wrapped around his body. Northstar Blade was shocked. He tried to break free, but he realized that he could not break free from the restriction of this power. The zombie energy surrounding his body grew thicker and thicker. Under the shocked gazes of the players, Northstar Blade was gradually covered by the zombie energy. The corpse energy condensed into a pitch-black coffin, its surface covered with countless sinister, ghostly patterns. The coffin completely sealed Northstar Saber, locking him inside. Seeing this, Hu-He grinned. The players knew that his ability was to refine zombies and control zombie spirits, but they had forgotten about his other strength. That was his understanding of seals. Hu-He had been studying how to break seals. As his understanding of seals deepened, he had long since thought of using the power of seals. This was the strongest killer move that he had spent a lot of time and energy researching, the corpse burial coffin seal. This sealing coffin contained the combined power of dozens of Ghost Kings. Once the seal was formed, it would be invincible within the same realm. It could even be used to fight against enemies of a higher realm. Bye-bye. Hu-He clenched his fist at the coffin. The zombie energy coffin slowly sank into the ground, burying itself deeper and deeper into the ground. With a snap of Hu-He's fingers, the entire island shook. At that moment, a game notification appeared. Arena notification. The duel has ended. Players from Beiki, Hu-He and Devil Spine, Northstar Blade. The winner is Hu-He, and he has obtained arena points, Seeing the victory notification, Hui opened his friend list and sent a message in the wall chat group. Hui, I've gotten my revenge. I didn't want to use this trick, but I think it's the best way to show off. Tong Gua Kim, JPG, Nye Fong, Demon King 666, I'm your little fan. I want to have your babies. Hui, shut up, dog. No wonder you didn't use Yuanshu and Hitorigami's zombie spirit. It turns out that you've already planned to show off. See King's disgusted face. JPG, Yishui, wow, Demon King, I didn't expect you to secretly develop such a strong ability. Tell us if you have any other tricks up your sleeves. Let us know. Laughing emoji, Chi Ming, I'm shocked. My little friend, Hui, you're really talented. It was the right decision to start your own class. Ao Jian, I've embarrassed you guys. Covering face, Guyu, haha, Ao Jian, don't say that. You've always been one of the strongest in my heart. I believe that you'll return to your peak. Oh yeah, you actually posted an emoji. Unbelievable. See King shock. JPG, Yuan Fong. Oh yeah, the cold Ao Jian actually posted an emoji. I suddenly feel more human. Chio shock. JPG, Little Pomelo. Backstab warning to the person above. No Chio emoji. The copyright belongs to Little Pomelo and her family. Chio Akim. JPG, In Xiaoqi. Him. The Demon King is awesome. Tang Mu. The Demon King is really strong. He can even create his own skills. He's an all-rounder. Time flow. JPG. Looking at the praises from his friends in the wall hanger group, Hui scratched his head in embarrassment. The corners of his mouth could not help but curl up. Following the end of the battle, the countdown timer for the exit of the arena appeared. At this moment, the players who were watching this battle were boiling with excitement. They felt that the entire battle was really exciting. Just when they thought that North Star One Blade was really going to create a legend, an earth-shattering reversal occurred. Hui's last move, which was almost unbreakable, achieved the ultimate kill, causing the players to howl in excitement. At this moment, the players only wanted to say the Demon King is awesome. The original server players were even spamming the live chat channel in unison. Your dad is still your dad. Are you guys convinced? My friend from the Asia server, are you still in the live chat channel? Come out and continue spamming me. Laughing emoji, the Demon King. Didn't you want to create a legend? Now, I'll make you a legend. Smack, smack, smack. Laughing emoji. The depressed mood of the original server players was instantly wiped away. Their previous arrogant attitude had returned. Chapter 687. A few hours after the end of the battle, the players were still immersed in the battle between the two pinnacle players. The two battles were really satisfying for the players. Many players even thought that they were playing a different game compared to who he and the others, as their combat power was completely incomparable. However, the rise of North Star Blade also gave hope to many players who joined the battle later on. It made them understand that being the strongest was not static and that they still had the hope to catch up and become a cheat-level player. The craze of learning combat skills spread. The players watched these two battles repeatedly, especially the one between Roving Sword and North Star One Blade. They could not imitate Hui's ability, but they could learn the combat skills of North Star Blade and Ao Jian. Many expert players' explanation videos were also popular during this period. These expert players with outstanding comprehension skills had spent a lot of effort to explain the two battles, even analyzing frame by frame in slow motion. Therefore, they were rewarded by the players in the forum, which was considered as a return for their efforts. This was undoubtedly a virtuous cycle for Lu Wu. Every time the expert players analyzed and explained with care, the players would be inspired and helped. Their explanation videos were shared in the forum, and, as the sharers, they would also be rewarded by the players, which would give them more motivation to produce better works to continue sharing with the players. This was also what Lu Wu wanted to see. The netherworld, the engulfing sea. A fleet sailed from afar, slowly approaching the port of the Bone Island in the center of the sea. The Sea King stood at the bow of the ship, looking in the direction of the island with a smile on his face. The netherworld's engulfing sea branch waged war against the player clan, which was something he did not want to see because he did not want to be enemies with the player clan. Therefore, the Sea King knew that he had to make a choice when the battle started. Although this process was inevitable, the Sea King decided to trust his own judgment, clenched his teeth, and prepared to be a traitor for once. However, the result was beyond his expectations. Elder Ying's inexplicable care surprised him, and the subsequent changes in the battle were even more bizarre. The confrontation between the two forces had turned into a battle of gods. When the venerable demonic ape and the venerable sword appeared, the battle had completely changed. Especially in the face of the venerable demonic ape's power, all external forces seemed so insignificant, and the fighting army was annihilated in the blink of an eye. While the Sea King was extremely shocked, he also realized how weak he was in the face of absolute power. At this moment, he yearned to develop and become stronger. He yearned for power. The Sea King wasn't sure what the final outcome of the battle between the venerable demonic ape and the venerable sword lord would be, but he was sure that he had won without doing anything. After encountering the player clan, the Sea King had thought that his life would be filled with ups and downs, a very miserable kind of life. After all, everything he had worked hard to build in the Void Ocean was destroyed by the player clan. It was as if he had to start all over again. He did not expect that he would reach heights that he had never reached before because of the player clan. At this moment, the Sea King was deeply moved. At this moment, the Mute battleship fleet was approaching the Bone Island. The soldiers stationed at the port immediately controlled the sea beasts to approach and began to check their identities. After seeing the Sea King take out the sea god's pardon that represented the War Chamber of Commerce's identity, the garrison did not stop him and immediately let him pass. At this time, there were already envoys sent by the Sea King stationed here waiting on the shore of the port. After the Sea King walked to the port, the messenger immediately went to greet him and led the Sea King to the giant tower in the center of the island. After a few hours, the Sea King, who had been rushing all the way, was led by the messenger to a woman who was half human and half snake. Looking at the charming woman lying on the chair in front of him, the Sea King muttered to himself, "Coquettish bitch." However, he did not dare to say this to her face. He naturally knew the identity of the woman in front of him. She was the president with the highest position in this underworld branch. She controlled the trade rights of several nearby seas and could be considered as a real overlord. "Mohai, I heard about you from Elder Ing. He thinks highly of you. Didn't you follow Elder Ing to the Void Ocean this time? Why did you suddenly inform the messenger that you want to see me?" The woman opened her red lips slightly and looked at the Sea King with a smile. The Sea King had a strange expression on his face. Elder Ing hasn't returned yet. The charming smile on the woman's face suddenly froze. She was still puzzled when she heard the Sea King's messenger say that the Sea King wanted to see her. However, she immediately realized that something was wrong when she heard the Sea King's words. As the helmsman of the Underworld Sea Branch, not only was she not stupid, but she was also very smart. She had already sensed danger from just a few words. "Tell me in detail." At this moment, she stood up and looked at the Sea King with a solemn expression. The Sea King's face showed a touch of depression. "President, it's like this. At that time, we gathered at the Kolong Ocean under Elder Ying's summons, and then went to the Void Ocean where the player clan was. When we arrived near the Lioli Ocean, we launched an attack on the player clan according to Elder Ying's instructions, but they resisted tenaciously. At this moment, the Sea King told her the whole story with slight modifications. At first, she didn't think there was a problem. However, when she heard that a Divine Realm expert appeared after the battle, and that Elder Ing couldn't hold on and chose to seek help from the headquarters, she couldn't help but widen her eyes. According to the Sea King's narration, the appearance of the demonic ape clan was difficult for the 10 major war chambers of commerce to resist. Later on, the appearance of the venerable demonic ape killed a Divine Realm expert from the headquarters with a raise of his hand. At this moment, Ling Shi's face turned pale. She knew that she was in trouble. Initially, Elder Ying's suggestion was to be cautious and not to attack the player clan. However, she rejected Elder Ying's decision and thought that the player clan couldn't withstand a single blow, so they could be wiped out with all their might. This decision was witnessed by many members in the meeting, including the messengers stationed here from the headquarters. At this moment, when she heard that the Divine Realm experts from the headquarters were killed in this battle, she knew that she was in trouble. Such a grievous news terrified her. Then why did you come back? Where are the others? At this moment, she glared at the Sea King fiercely, completely losing her previous calmness. At that time, the battle was very urgent. Elder Ing ordered me to guard the rear to prevent the remaining members of the player clan from escaping. Therefore, our Mute Chamber of Commerce suffered relatively little losses in this battle and wasn't affected by the battle between the venerable demonic ape and the Swordmaster. That's why we were lucky enough to return. The Sea King looked hesitant and scared. In fact, he was extremely happy. It's good that they died. It's good that they died. What about Elder Ing? Was he also in this battle? At this point, Ling Shi's face turned pale. Elder Ing was taken away by the Swordmaster. I don't know exactly where he went. I thought he had returned, and you already know everything. The Sea King answered immediately. After understanding the whole story, Ling Shi's eyes flickered with red light. One could see that her emotions were fluctuating greatly at this moment. After a moment of silence, Ling Shi was still deep in thought and didn't pay attention to the Sea King. The Sea King stood aside, not daring to speak or ask. At the same time, he scolded in his heart. Coquettish bitch, if there's nothing else, let me go. At this moment, Ling Shi spoke. Sea King, I understand. This time, the headquarters has distributed a batch of resources that belongs to your War Chamber of Commerce. You can go to the person in charge to collect it. I will inform you if there are any subsequent missions. The Sea King nodded respectfully and immediately chose to leave. At this moment, the Sea King was elated because he knew that this batch of resources would all belong to him and no one could divide it with him. After all, his teammates were all annihilated. Mute Chamber of Commerce was the only one left among the top 10 War Chambers of Commerce. The Underworld branch would definitely not detain this batch of resources because these were resources distributed by the headquarters to the War Chamber of Commerce. Engulfing the branch only had the right to transfer, but not the final decision. After all, nurturing the War Chamber of Commerce was not just a decision made by the branch. The Underworld Chamber of Commerce headquarters was the leader behind the scenes and only had the power to mobilize and appoint. In fact, all potential War Chambers of Commerce were one of the reserves of the Underworld Chamber of Commerce headquarters. Once they stood out and had enough strength to march into the Central Sea region, they would become a new force for the headquarters. This was also the reason why the Underworld Chamber of Commerce headquarters distributed 10 Neptunes pardon scrolls to the Underworld branch. With an excited mood, the Sea King followed the messenger and found the person in charge of managing this batch of resources. Just as the Sea King thought, the person in charge did not dare to embezzle it and handed all 10 sets of resources to him without exception. The ship came empty and returned with a full load. When he collected the resources, the Sea King grinned from ear to ear. Not long after the Sea King left, an emergency meeting was held on the Bone Island. Ling Shi did not dare to hide this matter and immediately informed the messenger station at the branch of the Underworld Chamber of Commerce about the Sea King's message. Without any hesitation, the Chamber of Commerce opened the communication rune he carried with him and passed the message to the Underworld Chamber of Commerce headquarters in the Central Sea region. Under Ling Shi's nervous expression, the Chamber of Commerce headquarters quickly replied. When she found out that the Sword Lord and the other 2 gods' messengers had not returned to the Chamber of Commerce headquarters, she sat paralyzed on the ground. She knew that she was completely finished. Just as she thought, the Underworld Chamber of Commerce headquarters issued a punishment order for her. The reason was that she did not clearly investigate the enemy situation and did not report to the Chamber of Commerce headquarters before acting rashly, causing a huge loss to the Chamber of Commerce headquarters. The content of the punishment was to remove President Ling Shi's right to be in charge of the engulfing sea branch and send her to the Central Sea region's water prison to be a resource slave for 800 years. When she heard that she was going to be a resource slave and suffer 800 years of hardship, Ling Shi's face no longer had the initial pride and confidence. She had used her entire life to climb to this step, but she did not expect that because of a mistake in decision-making, everything would be for naught. At this moment, she regretted not listening to Elder Ying's suggestion. As long as she knew the true details of the player clan, no matter how strong the player clan was, she could seek help from the Chamber of Commerce headquarters. When the war started, no matter how many God Realm powerhouses were killed, it would have nothing to do with her, because the Underworld Chamber of Commerce headquarters would take over. It would not be like this, where she had to bear the main responsibility. At the same time, all the senior members who supported Ling Shi's decision in the previous meeting were also affected. The resident envoy did not have the slightest sympathy and reported truthfully because this was his mission. Like President Ling Shi, these senior members were all removed from their positions and punished. At the same time, the Underworld Chamber of Commerce headquarters issued an order. If the second-in-command of the Engulfing Sea Branch, Elder Ying, returned, he would take over Ling Shi's position as president. If he did not return, he would report to the Chamber of Commerce headquarters and make a decision. The entire Engulfing Sea Branch of the Underworld Chamber of Commerce was reshuffled because of the war with the player clan. Most of the senior members were removed. This was followed by the arrival of a God's messenger from the Chamber of Commerce headquarters. These high-ranking personnel who were punished were all brought to the Central Sea region and became hard laborers mining in the Darkwater Dungeon resource area. They no longer had anything to do with the Engulfing Sea Branch that they had been wholeheartedly managing. This news quickly spread throughout the nearby sea region and caused a huge sensation. Chapter 688. The change in the higher-ups of the Netherworld branch in the Devouring Sea had caused a huge commotion in the nearby seas. The players soon learned about it from the forces in the nearby seas. However, the players didn't care about it. Their daily lives in the game went on, as usual. When Lu Wu heard the news, he felt the same way as the players. After all, he knew that the Netherworld branch in the Devouring Sea was nothing to the Netherworld Chamber of Commerce in the Central Sea. It couldn't even shake the foundation of the Netherworld Chamber of Commerce. What concerned Lu Wu was the battle between the venerable demonic ape and the Swordmaster. The battle had been going on for a few days. Lu Wu had been monitoring the battle with the artifact. Until today, the battle finally ended. When Lu Wu switched the screen, he realized that the powerful Swordmaster was seriously injured, and Elder Ying was nowhere to be found. In the end, the venerable demonic ape won the battle and returned to the Naraka realm. The seriously injured Sword Master fell from the sky. His body smashed into the south of the Jade Spring Sea. His soul was shattered, and only a trace of consciousness remained. The Sword Master had completely exhausted his life force. He couldn't ask for help even if he wanted to. As his physical body crumbled and his divine seal left his body, the powerful sword intent that burst forth from his body formed a new domain in the Jade Spring Sea domain, covering an area of 5 nautical miles. The inside of the domain was a vast expanse of whiteness, and there would occasionally be the sound of a sword humming. Such a huge change in the sea immediately attracted the attention of the forces in the Jade Spring Sea. All sorts of investigations were carried out. During this period, the players received the news from the nearby forces. Although they didn't know if this sword principal territory was related to the Sword Master in the Central Sea of the Netherworld, the players were curious about this unusual phenomenon and wanted to find out. After all, the players' consistent thinking was that all strange and wonderful events were. Maybe it was a chance. Maybe they could get a hidden inheritance. Maybe it was a chance. Maybe they could get a hidden treasure. Maybe it was a chance. Maybe they could get a lot of soul coins. As long as the players could think of something, it could be in there. After the news was posted on the forum, many players couldn't sit still and sailed over. All the players were eager to get something like an inheritance that was hard to come by. Other than the special growth weapons on Northstar Blade and AOGN, most of the weapons and equipment would change as the players grew. Legacies, on the other hand, would not. Legacies would provide players with greater enhancements and assistance as they grew. In comparison, Legacy was arguably the most valuable and potential enhancement at this stage of the game. Therefore, the players' imaginations ran wild when they saw the strange domain that had appeared in the Jade Spring Sea. Even though this domain didn't indicate that there was definitely a legacy inside, However, even if there was a 1 in 10,000 chance, or even an even lower chance, the players wouldn't want to miss it. As a result, a large number of players set off toward this sword principal domain. At the same time, in the Jade Spring Sea, north of the Void Ocean, a huge area of swordsmanship shrouded the southern part of the sea. Occasionally, sharp sword chi would shoot out from the area, and all the creatures in the area would not be able to escape the fate of being killed by the sword chi inside. As a result, the southern region of the sea was quickly dyed into a sea of blood, and the smell of blood filled the air. All the forces in the Jade Spring Sea region were alarmed because of this. Hai Meng, who sensed the ripples of the god's power, immediately dove into the depths of the sea. He did not want to be affected by the karma. The nearby forces, who were unaware of the situation, began to investigate. When they saw the sea that was dyed red with blood, although they were shocked, they still plucked up their courage and tried to get close to this white misty domain. However, when they stepped into the sword principal domain, they were greeted with countless sharp sword chi. Almost none of the spies from the forces in the Jade Spring Sea were spared. Most of them were engulfed by the sword chi, and a small number of powerful ones escaped with serious injuries. Such a terrifying sword principal domain immediately made the forces in the Jade Spring Sea afraid to act rashly. There were many speculations about this in the Jade Spring Sea, but they had no clue. It was at this time that the players' fleets arrived one after another. The forces in the Jade Spring Sea were actually very familiar with the player clan. Many of the forces in the Jade Spring Sea had even suffered losses in the hands of the player clan. However, they did not dare to make an enemy out of the player clan. Because the player clan's achievements in the sea were too valiant, they had become a huge force in their eyes. From the time they chased away the Sea King and dominated the Void Ocean, this rising force was already considered a very powerful force to the forces in the nearby sea regions. The subsequent head-on confrontation with the Underworld Chamber of Commerce shocked the major forces in the Jade Spring Sea. At that time, they only had one thought. The player clan was probably crazy. With such arrogance, they would definitely be wiped out by the Underworld Chamber of Commerce in the future. However, the fact was that the Underworld Chamber of Commerce had not been able to do anything to the player clan until now. Instead, they had suffered losses repeatedly. In particular, the recent news that the Underworld Chamber of Commerce in the Devouring Sea had launched an attack on the player clan, which led to the change of the top management, had changed their impression of the player clan greatly. At this time, the player clan was a top sea region force that they could only befriend and not offend. Therefore, when the player clan's fleet arrived, the members of the forces who were observing the situation around the sword principal domain decisively went forward to negotiate with the player clan, trying to persuade them and expressing their friendliness. They were like bootlickers. The players were already familiar with some of the members of these forces. They had even interacted with each other at the trade exchange held on a certain island. The players listened to their well-intentioned advice, but they didn't take it seriously. Because as long as there was a chance of obtaining an inheritance or rare item in this domain, it was worth it to risk their lives to explore. How could they be satisfied if they did not try? Therefore, a large number of players' warships and specter ships sailed into the sword principal domain under the shocked gazes of the various forces of the Jade Spring Sea. However, what greeted the players was the devastation of Sword Will and Sword Aura. A large number of players' ships were destroyed and people died. They did not even see clearly what was inside before their vision gradually darkened and the game notification of their death appeared as more players arrived from behind. Waves after waves of players were sent in. This completely dumbfounded the members of the various forces of the Jade Spring Sea. They did not dare to say or ask about it. After all, they could not afford to offend them. After the players' exploration of this sword principal domain lasted for a day and a night, many players suddenly felt a little autistic. That was because the players didn't reap any benefits from the almost 24-hour investigation. However, just as some players were about to give up, a post on the forum ignited the players' enthusiasm again. I was lucky enough to explore for hundreds of meters and was not sanctioned by the Sword Aura. In the end, I picked up this item. I think I might become rich overnight. Can you give me an estimate? Author, Molten Heart, attached picture. Item details. JPG, sword will fragment, purple special. Item introduction. An incomplete sword will comprehended by the sword venerable when he was young. It contains the essence of the tsunami sword principle. Comprehending and mastering part of the tsunami sword will improve one's swordsmanship. Item completeness. 12% item rating. Incomplete inheritance. Purple inheritance. Comprehension details. You need to have the foundation of sword principle. Otherwise, you will not be able to comprehend the profound sword will within. Item notes. This inheritance is extremely difficult to comprehend. Please use it carefully. Otherwise, you will suffer the backlash of the internal sword will, causing a lot of damage to yourself. Watermelon_Taro. Damn, this is the first time I've seen an inheritance that can be traded. I'm not bragging, but it will definitely fetch a sky-high price if sold. Many people who admire your son will probably cross the server to buy it. Author, you're really going to become rich overnight. Spread your wealth, jealous_I. JPG, crayon_Shinchan. The completeness of this inheritance is only 12%. It's not as valuable as you said. It's almost 1 in 10,000, but it will definitely sell for a high price. But didn't you notice the most important point? This thing is the sword will fragment of the underworld sword venerable. From this, is this guy dead? Shuali_the_strongest. As expected, the venerable demonic ape is stronger. After all, he is a powerhouse who can fight across realms. I'm right. Round_head_round_belly. I won the bet. Brother who bet to eat sh*t with me. It's your turn to perform. Remember to start a live broadcast, laughing emoji, and I'm not afraid of anyone. Mujyoga. Author, are you selling it? If you want to sell it, message me in private. I can give you a price that you're satisfied with. Fury_fanatic_. Europe. Author, sell it to me. The price is higher than the one above. Roasting_Jade_hair_. While_hugging_chonk. Stop talking. I'm very jealous now. I want to scream too. JPG_large_wolf dog. Ow, me too. Let's go. Crayon_Shinchan replied to A_large_wolf dog. What are you thinking? I can't imagine a dog wielding a sword. It'll be very unsightly. So I advise you to be kind. Give up your unrealistic thoughts and be a dog. Laughing emoji. At this moment, many players who took a wait-and-see attitude could no longer sit still. The players who started the thread had only obtained fragments of the inheritance, which meant that there were still many inheritance fragments inside. The players' enthusiasm was aroused by the appearance of this thread. A large number of players began to set off toward the Jade Spring Sea. As for whether Underworld Swordsmen had fallen, the players didn't care at all. As the craze for picking up the inheritance in the Swordao domain began, it got out of hand. Every day, a large number of player fleets would arrive at the southern sea of the Jade Spring, and every day, a large number of players would die in the domain. Such behavior completely dumbfounded the major forces of the Jade Spring. Regarding this, the major forces of the Jade Spring still didn't dare to say anything, let alone ask. They silently observed, their hearts trembling. It was also at this time that one of the players had his eyes on this feng shui treasure land. That was Mo Xiaoxin. The cultivation technique he cultivated, negative body, required him to absorb negative energy to advance his cultivation technique. Normally, if he went all out on the forum, although the effect was excellent, it would be followed by an increase in bounties. This wasn't a good thing for Mo Xiaoxin. After all, his mother with a big machete was always watching. Therefore, at this stage, he was much more restrained in the forum. At this moment, knowing that a large number of players died in the Sword Dao domain every day, he knew that his chance to grow had come. The dissatisfaction, anger, and resentment generated in the minds of these players were all things that he needed for his cultivation. Therefore, he decisively sailed his small boat to the Jade Spring Sea. Just as he thought, the negative emotions here were indeed very strong, very suitable for his cultivation. Apart from Mo Xiaoxin, another person also arrived on a Spectre ship. This person was Ao Jian. Since the shattering of his sword heart, Ao Jin completely gave up on the cultivation of a motionless sword. Although the pure sword was very strong, he knew that he could no longer walk this path, because he saw the love of his life that he thought he had lost. At that moment, the pure sword had already contaminated foreign objects and could no longer be as indestructible as it was originally. But at that time, he didn't choose to give up and still persisted in his sword Dao. However, at the moment of defeat, Ao Jin suddenly realized that he had such a desire for a long time, but the stubbornness in his heart made him continue to persist. What North Star Blade said was just the last straw that made him make up his mind. In the end, Ao Jin chose family instead of continuing to cultivate a motionless sword, and he would not do something so heartless that he would regret for the rest of his life just to break the longing in his heart. This path that he had been steadfast in completely collapsed with a failure. After the new sword heart was condensed, Ao Jin began to contact Mo Lanlan and Mo Xiaoxin. Although he still did not get a reply, he was willing to continue to work hard until he made up for the mistakes he had made and was forgiven by the two. At first, Ao Jin did not know about the Sword Dao domain incident that caused a sensation in the forum. This was because he did not open the forum at all for the past few days. Instead, he was thinking about Mo Xiaoxin and his mother. If not for Guyu's contact, Ao Jin would not have known about this until now. And this time, it was also Guyu and the others who persuaded him to give it a try. In this regard, Ao Jin still chose to agree after some hesitation. Although he had given up the cultivation of a motionless sword, his passion for Sword Dao had never faded. At this moment, he started all over again. Although he was not as crazy as he used to be, he was still obsessed with it. At this time, the small boat crossed the border of the sea and arrived at the Jade Spring Sea. After sailing for a distance, the white misty Sword Dao domain appeared in front of them. Ao Jin stood at the bow of the boat and looked up, a smile appearing at the corner of his mouth. Success or failure is no longer what I desire. I'll give it a try. Chapter 689. At this moment, Ao Jin's boat slowly sailed into the sword principal field. There were several other players' warships nearby. The moment he entered the field, Ao Jin found that his sword heart began to tremble. This was not the resonance between the sword heart and the sword essence in the field, but fear. This feeling was as if the sword heart in his body had met a stronger person who could completely suppress it. The raging sword essence in the field made the sword heart tremble. Ao Jin took a deep breath, gently soothed the throbbing in his heart, and continued to move forward. At this moment, there were curses coming from all around. Ao Jin immediately turned his head and looked in the direction of the sound. Through the hazy fog, he saw a warship collapsing under the raging sword chi. Countless figures fell into the water. Then, the curses faded, and everything returned to peace. Ao Jin was speechless. At this moment, Ao Jin also saw the danger inside the sword principal field. However, he was still very calm. Continuing to move forward, the boat moved forward for about 10 meters. Ao Jin's heart trembled. He suddenly looked up to the left and suddenly found a blue fragment shooting toward him. There were also 8 streams of sword chi circling around the blue fragment. Each stream of sword chi was filled with a terrifying chill. Seeing this scene, Ao Jin immediately waved his hand, and the 9 spiritual swords behind him suddenly hovered in front of him, forming a sword formation. However, what Ao Jin did not expect was that the sword seal condensed by the blue sword essence suddenly stopped in the air. It did not attack him, but trembled and made a buzzing sound. As the blue sword seal trembled, Ao Jin suddenly understood the meaning that this sword seal was conveying to him. To be precise, this sword seal was conveying a very simple message to the sword essence in his body. Challenge. This sword seal fragment, condensed by sword essence, wanted to challenge the sword essence in his body. After a short moment of shock, Ao Jin could not help but shake his head and smile. He withdrew the 9 spiritual swords in front of him, and then looked at the sword essence and stood still. The momentum of his body began to rise. As if sensing that Ao Jian responded to a challenge, the blue sword seal trembled even more violently, and waves of sword essence instantly enveloped Ao Jian. Under the pressure of this overbearing sword essence, Ao Jian's face instantly turned pale. The sword essence in his body became even more chaotic and began to collapse little by little. In a battle of sword intents, the loser's sword heart would definitely be disturbed, and a lot of sword intent would be worn away. Although this was only one of the many sword wills of the Underworld Sword Master, and it was only a fragment, the powerful sword will was still not something that Ao Jian could resist. He could not help but take a step back. With his step back, the newborn sword essence in Ao Jian's body suddenly collapsed, and the aura on his body dissipated. The blue sword seal stopped trembling at this moment. Once again, a crisscrossing sword chi appeared around it and locked onto Ao Jian. At this moment, Ao Jian felt a murderous intent. However, Ao Jian did not panic. He calmly looked at the blue sword seal, and a new sword was born in his body again. As long as the sword heart was not broken, even if the sword intent dispersed, it could still be reforged. As the sword will in Ao Jian's body emerged again, the murderous intent on the blue sword will faded and it challenged him again. Ao Jian still chose to accept the challenge. With the familiar pressure of the sword essence, the newborn sword essence in Ao Jian's body could not withstand it and collapsed. However, when the blue sword seal wanted to kill Ao Jian again, the sword will in his body condensed and reignited again. It might be difficult for others to condense the sword will again. Every time the sword will collapsed, the swordsman would inevitably lose his fighting spirit, and even his sword heart would be unstable. However, Ao Jian had long let go of all this. In the past, he almost went mad because of his failure in the sword competition. His obsession for victory was extremely strong. However, after going through so much, especially when he knew that his true love was still alive, he had discovered that there was something more important. After losing to North Star Blade, he was unwilling and could not even bear his own failure. However, the emotion sword that North Star Blade mentioned made him wake up, and he made a decision to let go of the biggest obsession in his heart. At that moment, the sword heart was broken, and the sword will that had been recast had long been reborn. From that moment on, success or failure was fleeting. Ao Jian only had pure love for the sword and nothing else. Therefore, even if the sword will collapsed, Ao Jian could still condense easily. This was because there was no obsession for victory in his sword will, no pursuit of the strongest sword principle, and no desire to use the sword to achieve any purpose. This time, there was only love in the pure sword will. The emotionless sword that he had embarked on was a sword principle path that gradually abandoned feelings and humanity. Any feelings and humanity were like a scabbard that firmly locked Ao Jian's sword will, making it unable to be unsheathed. If it was not cut, it would be like a sword being unsheathed. How could the sword be sharp? Therefore, when competing with North Star Blade, Ao Jian was an emotionless sword that was unsheathed and had no power to speak of. The moment the sword heart was broken, it was equivalent to the disappearance of the scabbard. This path had finally come to an end. After condensing the new sword will, Ao Jian only had love for the sword. As long as his love did not diminish, other feelings would not affect his sword will, and victory and defeat could not shake his sword heart. It was easy to condense the sword heart with love, but it was too difficult to reach this level. This was like North Star Blade. He cared about his sword because it could help him take revenge, kill enemies, protect, and so on. Therefore, the sword was more like an indispensable tool for North Star Blade, rather than a pure love. He could not condense such a sword heart. It was the same for Ao Jian. Although he was obsessed with the sword, he was still affected by many other factors. His original idea was to surpass emotionless and practice swordsmanship hard. After receiving Jian Chao's inheritance, he recognized Jian Chao's swordsmanship even more. If he was not talented enough, he could use a sword to make up for it. If one was not enough, he would use two. But in fact, if he wanted to make up for the talent gap and compare with others, he already had a competitive heart. This was not a pure love for the sword, but because he still had a goal to achieve in his heart. But this time, apart from love, Ao Jian had no other thoughts for the sword. Therefore, Ao Jian achieved something that was almost impossible for many swordsmen. He easily condensed the collapsed sword will again. Even if he failed, it did not cause any damage to the new sword will. The challenge of the blue sword seal continued. In the confrontation of sword will again and again, Ao Jian was calm as the defeated party, but the blue sword seal that won every battle was obviously dim. It could not break Ao Jian's love for the sword. The sky gradually darkened, and the confrontation between Ao Jian and the blue sword seal came to the 132nd time. In this confrontation, Ao Jian's sword will once again collapsed. But the moment he condensed the sword will again, the victorious blue sword will suddenly collapsed into bits of starlight. The sword chi flowed, and Ao Jian felt a vigorous aura of swordsmanship spreading around. He subconsciously closed his eyes and began to feel the aura of swordsmanship. After a while, Ao Jian opened his eyes, and a smile appeared on his face. At this time, the game prompt sounded. Game prompt. Congratulations on comprehending the sword will extreme waves inherited by the sword master. The comprehension progress is 19%. Game prompt. Your sword will has been enhanced. Glancing at the game prompt, Ao Jian's heart did not fluctuate much. Although there was joy, this joy came from the comprehension of the new sword will, not from the enhancement of his own strength. At this time, the surrounding aura of swordsmanship had dissipated. After a moment of contemplation, Ao Jian was ready to go deeper. At this time, he suddenly found two sharp sword wills coming from not far to his left. He immediately turned his head and saw two sword seals, one red and one purple, fighting and killing each other. Seeing this scene, he was curious and could not help but watch. Among these two sword seals, one of them was domineering like fire, and there seemed to be raging flames burning in the sword will. Ao Jian even felt a sense of anger from it, as if it wanted to burn everything. The other one was calm and steady, and the sword will condensed into one. Its aura was restrained, but every time it attacked, it was like thunder, unusually domineering and fierce, as if it wanted to kill its opponent with one blow. In the confrontation between these two sword wills, the fiery sword will gradually could not resist and began to gradually collapse. However, the restrained sword will gradually became stronger, and the sword will was strengthened. In the end, the fiery sword seal was defeated, and the scattered sword will was absorbed by the restrained purple sword seal. At this moment, the momentum of the purple sword seal rose steadily, and there was an obvious enhancement. The sword will of the fiery sword seal was also in the sword will. Seeing this scene, Ao Jian was extremely surprised. When the blue sword seal challenged him just now, he was already very puzzled. It was as if these broken sword seals had a consciousness. At this moment, seeing the scene of the red sword seal being swallowed by the purple sword seal, Ao Jian could not help but guess. Could it be that these sword seals really had a consciousness, and the purpose of the challenge was to absorb the opponent's sword will to strengthen itself? If this assumption was true, Ao Jian felt that this was simply the venomous insect cultivation domain of the sword will. If this domain continued to exist, then there would inevitably be a strong sword seal that would swallow all the other sword seals and condense into the only new sword seal in this area. Thinking of this, Ao Jian suddenly had an idea in his mind. If so, could I also become a venomous insect in this venomous insect cultivation domain, and then condense my own new sword will in the challenge and challenge? When this idea appeared, Ao Jian was excited. Naturally, Ao Jian was eager to understand the many sword will ultimacy left by the underworld sword lord, because he was such a person obsessed with the sword. Now that there was such an opportunity, he definitely did not want to miss it. Thinking of this, Ao Jian steered the boat to the purple sword seal that was still absorbing the scattered sword will. At this moment, the purple sword seal that had just one also noticed the challenge from Ao Jian sword will. The sword will suddenly locked onto Ao Jian and began to suppress him. This sword seal was more powerful than the previous blue sword seal, and in a short period of time, it successively defeated the sword will condensed by Ao Jian. However, Ao Jian was still unmoved. While failing, he continued to feel the sword will aura contained in the purple sword seal, trying to understand the sword truth of the underworld swordmaster. Time continued to pass in such a way, and a day quickly passed. At this time, the purple sword seal no longer had the irresistible and indomitable overbearingness, and seemed dim and dull. After several more confrontations, the purple sword seal finally could not hold on any longer, and suddenly collapsed. With the majestic sword will aura rushing toward him, the sword will in Ao Jian's body trembled and began to absorb this sword will aura. After this challenge, Ao Jian's sword will was strengthened again. For other players, this might be a strange place full of opportunities and dangers. However, for Ao Jian at this moment, it was the best place to condense a new sword will. Inside and outside the sword domain, the father and son were growing rapidly by relying on the sword domain.